Hello there, and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity finds its quiet corner and science drifts softly between wonder and sleep. Tonight, we're setting out across a landscape that has watched empires rise and fall, where the air carries the weight of thousands of forgotten voices, and the ground itself remembers what history forgot to write down. If you've ever looked at a picture of the Great Pyramids and felt something you couldn't quite explain, a mixture of awe, mystery, and a faint sense of being watched by time itself, then you're already part of the story. What if those towering shapes weren't just tombs or monuments, but messages? Not words carved in stone, but ideas built to last longer than language. What if, in the heart of the desert, the pyramids are the last message from Earth's first civilization, one that came before Egypt, before writing, before what we think of as history? It's an idea both thrilling and unsettling. Because if that's true, then everything we know about where we came from might just be the surface of something deeper. Before we start dusting off those ancient thoughts, tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Somewhere warm, maybe? Somewhere with the hum of the city outside your window, or the quiet of a countryside night? Maybe you can hear rain, or maybe just the soft tick of a clock nearby. Wherever you are, take a moment to notice the space around you. The light, the stillness, the air moving just enough to remind you that time hasn't stopped. Because that's the strange thing about the pyramids. They make time feel like it could pause if it wanted to. If you find this kind of gentle wandering to be a comforting way to drift through the evening, it would mean a lot if you gave this video a like or subscribed. It helps this small world of calm curiosity find others who might need a moment of quiet thinking too. And now, let's take that slow step into the desert together. Imagine standing before them, the three giants of Giza, patient and still beneath the same sun that once shone on the pharaohs. The air is hot, dry, and full of distance. The sound of the wind over sand could almost be a whisper, as if the stones themselves are breathing. People have been coming here for centuries, asking the same questions, tracing the same shadows, wondering who first decided to build mountains by hand. The common story is neat, tidy, and familiar. The pyramids were built around 4,500 years ago, during Egypt's Old Kingdom, as tombs for powerful kings. Tens of thousands of workers moved limestone blocks into place with ropes, ramps, and raw determination. It's a good story, simple enough to teach, precise enough to repeat. But when you stand before them, or even when you just look closely at a photograph, something in that neatness begins to feel too small for the size of what you're seeing. Each stone, some weighing as much as a car, is placed so perfectly that you could barely slide a piece of paper between the seams. The base of the Great Pyramid is level to within a fraction of an inch, and aligned almost perfectly to true north. Its sides are not 4 but 8, each face subtly indented, a detail invisible to most eyes but visible from above, especially when the sun rises or sets at certain angles. The structure itself is older than most of the world's written stories, and yet still standing, unmoved by earthquakes, storms, and the long, quiet patience of sand. Why build something so vast, so precise, and so durable, unless you wanted it to be seen, not just by your people or your children, but by anyone who might come after? Maybe even by those who wouldn't recognize your name or your gods. If you were the last of something, and wanted to leave a message for whoever might come next, what better way than to shape the Earth itself into a message too big to miss? Some scientists, archaeologists, and engineers argue that the pyramid's precision is simply a triumph of human effort and ingenuity. They point to clever engineering, organisation, and time. A century or two of continuous labour guided by skilled hands. Others, though, have wondered if the story is older, stranger, not the product of one kingdom, but the echo of something before it. A knowledge that survived the collapse of an earlier world, carried quietly across generations until it could take form again in stone. That thought isn't meant to replace history, but to stretch it a little. After all, written history is just a sliver of human existence. For nearly all of our species' time on Earth, we left no writing, no names, no detailed records, only fragments of tools, bones, and art. What if there was more to that gap? What if, before Egypt, there had been another civilization, not necessarily one with computers or steel, but with a different kind of sophistication, perhaps in understanding the Earth, the stars, or geometry itself. Something capable of leaving behind a symbol that would survive the ages. It's an idea that lingers not because it's proven, but because it feels possible. Every time a new archaeological discovery pushes back the timeline of human achievement, a site older than expected, a map more advanced than it should be, the edges of what we think we know begin to blur. The pyramids, in that light, become less of a mystery to solve and more of a mirror. They reflect both what we know and what we're still capable of imagining. Close your eyes for a moment and picture what it would take to build something that could outlive the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Not just materials and labour, but a belief, a sense that what you were doing mattered beyond your lifetime. That kind of purpose changes the shape of thought itself. Maybe that's what we're really seeing in those perfect lines and massive stones. Not just architecture, but intention. A message not in words, but in endurance. There's a quiet irony in the fact that we often call them tombs. If they were, they've succeeded too well. Their occupants, whoever they were, have long turned to dust, yet the stones remain. The pyramids have survived empires, conquests, revolutions, and now the digital age, where we can orbit them in satellites or zoom in on their surfaces from half a world away. They've outlasted everything else their builders ever made, including their names carved in fragile ink on papyrus. It's as if the message they carried was never about death, but continuity. Look at them at night, bathed in moonlight, the stars wheeling above. The symmetry of their placement seems deliberate, like punctuation marks in the landscape. Their alignment with Orion's belt, though debated, continues to fascinate astronomers and dreamers alike. If that alignment was intentional, it suggests something profound, that whoever designed them wasn't just thinking about Earth, but about the sky, about how humanity's place in the cosmos might be written into the ground itself. And perhaps that's the true genius of it, the blending of heaven and earth, matter and meaning. The stones point upward, but they're anchored in the soil. They bridge the physical and the symbolic, the human and the cosmic. Even if they were simply built as tombs, they carry an understanding of permanence that few other creations possess. When we think of civilizations, we often measure them by what they left behind. Pottery, tools, inscriptions, ruins, each one a trace of how people lived, thought and dreamed. But the pyramids go beyond that. They don't just tell us how people lived, they remind us that people wanted to be remembered, that they feared being forgotten, that they believed in some deep and stubborn way that knowledge could be preserved not through words, but through weight, through symmetry, through stone. There's something profoundly human in that. We do the same thing today, only with different materials. We build archives, data centres, satellites that carry golden records of our species out into space. Each one is our own attempt to leave a message for whoever or whatever might come after us. Maybe that instinct, to reach across time, has always been there. Maybe it's as old as the first people who looked at the stars and realised that some of those lights were already gone, yet their glow was still travelling toward us. If the pyramids were a message, maybe it wasn't meant to be read in any single language. Maybe it was meant to be felt. A reminder that humanity once understood something vast about balance, endurance, and the dialogue between sky and ground. Maybe that's why, even after all these years, people still stand before them and feel small in a strangely comforting way. It's easy to imagine the desert as empty, but that's not quite true. The desert is full of memory. The sand covers, protects, and eventually reveals. Beneath those dunes lie fragments of cities, bones of animals that no longer exist, pottery that once held food for people whose names we'll never know. And beneath all that, deeper still lies time itself, compacted, layered, waiting to be read like sediment in a story too long to tell in words. If the pyramids are indeed a message, then the desert is the envelope. The silence around them isn't emptiness, it's preservation. The still air, the slow wind, the endless repetition of days, they've all kept the message intact. And we, centuries later, are the ones finally opening it. But what are we supposed to hear? What are we meant to understand? Maybe that's what makes this question so haunting. Every generation interprets the pyramids differently. To ancient travellers, they were proof of divine power. To early scholars, mathematical puzzles. To modern engineers, wonders of precision. To philosophers and dreamers, they're reminders that the past may not be as simple as we imagine. The pyramids are patient enough to be all those things at once. The desert at Giza hasn't changed much in thousands of years. The same sun burns above it, the same wind carves its dunes, the same stars pass overhead. That kind of constancy is rare. It's what allows something like the pyramids to act as a bridge, not just between past and present, but between civilizations separated by unimaginable stretches of time. Every generation that looks upon them becomes part of their story. Every visitor adds another layer of meaning, and yet, for all our technology and scholarship, we still don't know everything. We can map every inch, scan the interiors with cosmic rays, detect hidden chambers, trace quarry routes, and even estimate labour forces. But the why, the deep, human why, still slips through our fingers. Why this shape? Why this scale? Why this perfect alignment? Why here, of all places? Maybe that's the message itself. That some things aren't meant to be decoded like puzzles, but experienced like conversations. The pyramids aren't just telling us about the past, they're asking us something about ourselves. What do we believe is worth lasting? What will we build that could still be standing 4,000 years from now? What kind of message are we leaving for the future? And so, as we move deeper into this story, let's keep that thought close. The pyramids may be the last message from Earth's first civilization, or simply the first message from ours. Either way, they remind us that time doesn't erase everything. Some things, if built with enough care, can outlast even history. Now that we've stood in the shadow of their silence and felt the weight of their mystery, let's begin to brush the sand aside and look beneath the surface. Because the desert doesn't just bury things, it keeps them. And somewhere under that golden sea there are still echoes waiting to be heard. The wind moves differently in the desert. It doesn't rush like it does in cities or forests. It drifts, unhurried, reshaping the surface of the world one grain at a time. Over years, over centuries, that slow movement becomes its own kind of memory. It erases and preserves all at once. The sand buries, but it also guards. It hides what the world isn't yet ready to remember. That's part of what makes this landscape so haunting. When you look at the pyramids, you're not just seeing stone. You're seeing what managed to stay above the sand, the rare fragments of a story that refused to be buried. Just beyond the edges of Giza, there are places where the dunes have swallowed entire structures. Archaeologists find the tips of walls, the outlines of lost temples, the remnants of cities that were once alive with trade, music, and the smell of bread baking in clay ovens. The people who lived there are gone, their names erased by time, but the ground still holds them quietly. Every excavation is an act of conversation. The scientists dig, and the earth answers in fragments, a shard of pottery, a chipped tool, a mural half-eaten by time. The sand doesn't rush to reveal its secrets. It offers them carefully, as if testing our patience. There's something poetic about that, though not in a decorative way. More in the way nature seems to pace its revelations. The deeper the archaeologists dig, the older the questions become, and the closer they get to the base of the pyramids, the more they find that history isn't layered in neat chapters. It's tangled. Older structures beneath newer ones. Foundations built upon something even older still. Some discoveries at the Giza Plateau suggest there may have been earlier settlements long before the official timeline of pyramid construction. Carved stones worn smoother than expected, tunnels that seem to have no direct purpose, chambers sealed not by collapse but by deliberate design. Some scientists argue these are simple coincidences of geology or reused building materials. Others aren't so sure. To them, these fragments whisper that maybe Egypt's old kingdom wasn't the beginning of civilization here, but a revival, a rebuilding of something far more ancient. It's a pattern we've seen in many places. New societies rise and often build over the ruins of those before them. It's practical, but it also means that history folds over itself like layers of sediment. Look deep enough into the earth, and you start to see echoes, hints of earlier knowledge that seem almost out of place for their supposed time. In Turkey, the site of Göbekli Tepe rewrote parts of human history when it was discovered in the 1990s. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles carved with animals, built by people we thought were still nomads, long before farming or cities were supposed to exist. The site is over 11,000 years old, nearly twice as old as the pyramids. If hunter-gatherers could create something so vast and symbolically complex that early, what else might have been possible? Could there have been other centres of knowledge, other communities that left behind structures or traditions later absorbed by cultures like Egypt's? We may never know for sure, but the possibility stretches the imagination in the best way. It suggests that civilization isn't a straight line of progress, but a rhythm. Advances rising and falling like the tides. Sometimes knowledge surges forward, and sometimes it sinks beneath the sand, waiting for the next world to uncover it. There are places beneath Giza that even today remain unexplored. Subterranean passages, chambers detected by modern scanning technology, anomalies in the ground that don't match natural formations. Some are known, others are suspected. Ancient texts hint at a hall of records, a mythical archive said to contain the wisdom of an earlier age. Most scholars dismiss it as legend, but legends often start with small truths. Perhaps not a literal library buried in stone, but the idea that some people, long ago, feared their world might not last and tried to preserve what they knew. When you stand at the edge of the desert and look out across the dunes, it's easy to believe that time is still moving there, but slowly. The sand drifts like a second hand that takes centuries to tick. What it hides isn't gone, only sleeping. Every century, wind and erosion uncover something new. A piece of wall, a statue's face, an inscription no one's seen for thousands of years. Each rediscovery is both a surprise and a reminder that history doesn't vanish, it just waits for light again. Beneath the sands of Saqqara, just south of Giza, tunnels stretch for miles. They're filled with the remains of animals once worshipped as sacred, mummified with as much care as kings. But deeper still, archaeologists have found chambers that predate even those rituals. Structures whose purpose isn't yet clear, carved into bedrock with precision far beyond what was thought possible for their time. Some sections appear to have been built not for burial but preservation, like vaults designed to outlast everything else. That idea alone fuels the thought that maybe we're looking at an inheritance. Architecture passed down, reused, repurposed, each generation adding layers but never fully understanding what lay beneath. There's a kind of humility that comes with realizing how much we don't know. We look back at the past through the lens of our current understanding, assuming that ancient people were always simpler, less capable, less aware. Yet the more we study these sites, the more those assumptions begin to feel fragile. The ancient builders, whoever they were, had astronomical knowledge, geometric mastery, and an understanding of stone that still challenges modern engineers. They might not have had electricity or computers, but they clearly had something else. Patience, observation, and a sense of purpose that stretched beyond their lifetimes. If there was a civilization before the one we know as Egypt, it would make sense that its traces are faint. Catastrophe has a way of erasing. Sea levels rise, climates shift, river courses change, floods bury, earthquakes swallow, deserts spread. A few thousand years of that, and even monumental stone can disappear under layers of silt and sand. The idea of an earlier culture isn't about rewriting history with conspiracy, but about accepting that history might be incomplete. Some researchers suggest that during the end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, global temperatures rose rapidly. Meltwater from retreating glaciers flooded coastal regions worldwide. Whole landscapes vanished beneath the sea. If any advanced communities existed near coastlines, their remains would now be underwater, scattered along what were once fertile plains. In places like India, Japan, and the Mediterranean, sonar mapping has revealed what appear to be submerged ruins. Whether these are natural or man-made is still debated, but their existence sparks a question too compelling to ignore. Could the pyramids be the surviving memory of a world that didn't survive? It's an unsettling but strangely hopeful idea. That something of them endured, not their language, not their cities, but their message. A message encoded in geometry, in proportion, in endurance itself. It would explain why so many ancient monuments around the world share similar features. Massive stone blocks, astronomical alignments, a focus on cardinal directions. From the pyramids of Egypt to those in Mesoamerica, from ziggurats in Mesopotamia to temples in Peru, the echoes repeat. Different cultures, different continents, yet the same silent conversation between earth and sky. Mainstream archaeology attributes these similarities to convergent evolution, the natural result of humans solving similar problems in similar ways. A pyramid, after all, is a stable shape. It distributes weight evenly, resists erosion, and points naturally upward, which carries spiritual meaning in almost every culture. That explanation is logical and likely true for most cases. But there's another possibility, softer but equally interesting: cultural memory. What if the idea of the pyramid wasn't invented again and again, but remembered, passed down in story, in myth, in some half-forgotten way that survived the ages even after the civilization that started it was gone? That's what makes the desert so fascinating. It isn't empty, it's full of fragments of forgotten memory. The sand itself acts like an archive, one that stores evidence in layers of dust instead of ink. Each storm rearranges the filing system. Each excavation opens a new chapter we didn't know existed. And sometimes, what we find doesn't fit where we expect it to. Tools older than the civilization they're found with. Maps showing coastlines that shouldn't have existed yet. Symbols repeated across continents where contact was supposedly impossible. These details don't rewrite history by themselves, but they do make it more textured, more alive, more mysterious. When you listen to the wind moving across the dunes, it almost sounds like water. The same slow rhythm, the same sense of motion without direction. Maybe that's why so many myths about ancient floods and lost worlds come from regions that are now deserts. The Sahara itself was once green, covered in grasslands and lakes. Cave paintings deep within the desert show swimmers and animals that couldn't survive there today. The landscape changed, the water withdrew, and with it, entire ways of life. What remains now are the bones of what once was, not just animals, but ideas. It's not difficult to imagine a group of people watching that change happen. A civilization slowly realizing their world was drying, shrinking, disappearing beneath sun and sand. What would they have done? They couldn't stop the climate from shifting, but they could try to leave something behind, something that would endure when everything else was gone. Perhaps the pyramids began as that promise, a way to say, "We were here, we understood something, remember us." The more you think about it, the more sense it makes. Human beings have always wanted to be remembered. Every culture finds a way to tell the future that it existed, through writing, art, architecture, or myth. We bury time capsules. We carve dates into cornerstones. We send probes into space with records of our world. It's our way of pushing back against the silence that waits at the end of every story. If the pyramids are part of that same impulse, then they're not just relics. They're part of a long, unbroken tradition of communication between the past and the future. Modern science, for all its tools and precision, still relies on interpretation. Data can tell us what happened, but not always why. When we find a hidden chamber, or an artifact whose purpose isn't clear, we project our own thoughts onto it. We try to read meaning where the original language has vanished. That's both the challenge and the beauty of archaeology. It reminds us that understanding the past isn't about collecting facts. It's about empathy across time. Some researchers have even begun exploring how ancient structures like the pyramids might encode mathematical constants. The golden ratio, pi, or relationships between the Earth and celestial measurements. Others are sceptical, calling it coincidence or pattern seeking. But whether by design or intuition, those proportions exist. The question isn't just whether they meant to build something mathematically perfect, but whether they felt the same sense of harmony we still recognise when we look at them. Even if they couldn't explain it in modern terms, perhaps they sensed it, that balance between structure and mystery. In a way, the sand beneath Giza isn't just holding stones, it's holding silence, a silence that hums with possibilities. The deeper we look, the more it seems that we're uncovering not a single story, but layers of attempts to be remembered. Each buried wall, each inscription, each artifact is a sentence in an unfinished letter. And the pyramids are the signature, bold, enduring, written in the most permanent medium they could find. Every civilization believes it will last. Every one of them eventually fades. But what endures isn't just the ruins, it's the effort to be heard. That effort connects us to whoever built those first monuments. They might have lived thousands of years ago, but their motives feel familiar. Curiosity, pride, fear of being forgotten, hope that knowledge can outlast time. In that sense, they weren't so different from us. We're still digging, still building, still trying to leave something that says we were here. When night falls over the desert, the temperature drops sharply. The air cools, the sand holds its heat a little longer, and the stars return with startling brightness. Looking out over that dark horizon, you can almost feel the presence of all those buried worlds beneath you. Layers upon layers of human effort, stories that once were vivid, now reduced to dust and echoes. Yet those echoes still reach us. Every discovery we make, every grain of sand brushed aside, is one more voice returning to the conversation. And somewhere in that conversation, the pyramids keep their silence. They don't need to answer. They just stand, patient as always, watching the dunes shift, waiting for us to keep asking the right questions. Because that's what they've always been. Not monuments to certainty, but invitations to wonder. As we move forward, we'll begin to explore not just what might lie beneath them, but what their very design might be telling us. Because sometimes the clearest message isn't hidden underground, but written openly in shape and proportion. The kind of message that doesn't need translation, only attention. The sun rises over the plateau with a kind of precision that feels rehearsed. Every shadow stretches exactly as it has for thousands of years, tracing lines across the desert floor that seem almost deliberate. The pyramids don't change, but the light does, sliding slowly along their edges until the stone glows as if it remembers its own making. This is where geometry becomes emotion. Standing before them, you can feel that these structures were built not just to exist, but to endure. Their survival is no accident. It's the result of design so exact that it borders on conversation, as though the builders weren't just constructing tombs, but blueprints for something beyond themselves. It's easy to think of blueprints as modern tools, sheets of measurements and angles that guide engineers through precision. But here, the concept takes on a different meaning. The pyramids are blueprints not in paper or ink, but in form itself. They map out ideas about permanence, proportion, and harmony. Everything about them, from the angle of their sides to the orientation of their base, follows a logic so consistent that it feels intentional beyond mere function. Each block, each alignment, seems to speak a language of numbers. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the largest and most studied of them all, rises originally to about 481 feet, though erosion has worn it slightly down. Its base stretches over 13 acres, each side measuring roughly 756 feet. Yet those sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that still baffles modern tools. The deviation from true north is less than 1/20th of a degree, a level of precision that would be impressive even with modern instruments, let alone copper tools and star charts carved by hand. To achieve that, the builders must have known the sky intimately. They would have tracked the movement of stars, especially those near the celestial pole, marking their rising and setting points across nights and seasons until the Earth itself seemed to reveal its symmetry. By fixing their measurements to the heavens, they anchored their structure not to a temporary landscape, but to the rotation of the planet itself. That choice, deliberate and careful, gave the pyramid a kind of immortality. Even as mountains erode and rivers change course, the stars return to their places. Alignment to the sky is alignment to time. Inside, the geometry becomes even stranger. The passageways of the Great Pyramid descend and ascend at specific angles that seem to reference not only function, but proportion. The so-called King's Chamber, built entirely of granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons each, sits at the heart of the structure like a pulse. Above it, 5 relieving chambers distribute weight with mathematical precision. Yet some researchers have noticed that the measurements between these chambers form ratios, relationships between height and width, that echo constants found in mathematics and nature. Ratios close to phi, the golden mean, appear in their slopes. Others find traces of pi in the relationship between the pyramid's base and its height. Whether these were intentional or coincidental remains debated, but the consistency is difficult to ignore. If it was deliberate, then the pyramid becomes more than architecture. It becomes a statement, a physical translation of mathematical truth into stone. Imagine living in a world where knowledge wasn't written on paper, but carved into existence, where wisdom wasn't preserved in books, but built into shapes that could withstand erosion and ignorance alike. That's what these blueprints of forever might represent. Knowledge not recorded, but embodied. There's a quiet kind of reverence in that idea. The people who built these structures didn't just think about their own time, they thought about all time. To design something to last thousands of years is to believe in continuity, to trust that someone someday will still be here to look up and wonder. That belief is the hidden foundation of every pyramid. Beneath the limestone and granite lies an act of faith in the persistence of humanity itself. The method by which they achieve such precision remains partly mysterious. Archaeologists have found evidence of simple but ingenious tools, levelling instruments using water channels, sighting rods for measuring angles, and plumb lines made from fibre and stone. Some believe they use star observations to set true north by watching the crossing point of certain constellations. Others think the alignment was achieved through solar shadow measurements. However they did it, the outcome is the same, a monument that behaves more like a machine than a pile of stone. It measures, it balances, it endures. What's remarkable is how adaptable the pyramid form proved to be. Its shape distributes weight evenly down each side, meaning it can stand for millennia with minimal erosion. In the harsh desert climate where temperature shifts crack weaker materials, the pyramid's angles deflect the worst of the stress. It's both simple and perfect, a structure that nature itself would approve of. When you think about it that way, the design feels less like invention and more like discovery, as if the builders didn't create the pyramid's shape so much as uncover it, finding within geometry the form that time would respect most. Every ancient builder knew the inevitability of decay. Wood rots, metal corrodes, even stone eventually crumbles. But some materials decay slower than others, and some shapes resist entropy better than others. A cube erodes unevenly. A dome spreads its stress. But a pyramid, with its wide base and narrowing apex, settles into stability. The higher you build, the stronger its lower layers become. The very force of gravity becomes part of its endurance. It's like the builders learned how to make the planet itself help them keep their monument standing. For them to have known that, consciously or instinctively, suggests a long tradition of observation, perhaps centuries of trial, error, and refinement passed through generations. The Great Pyramid wasn't the first. It was the culmination of many attempts that came before. Early step pyramids, mastabas, and transitional structures show experiments in scale and design, each one a prototype, a rehearsal, an evolving dialogue between ambition and knowledge. By the time Khufu's builders began, they weren't guessing. They were perfecting. And perfection is rarely born suddenly. It's the product of memory, the slow accumulation of understanding, which again raises that deeper question. Where did that understanding come from originally? Some scholars think the roots of that knowledge reach far back into prehistory, perhaps to people who studied the cycles of the sun and stars long before cities existed. Ancient astronomers living in open landscapes would have noticed patterns, solstices, equinoxes, the returning of constellations. These patterns, repeated year after year, might have been the first kind of calendar. And from calendars came measurement. From measurement came architecture. Bit by bit they learned how to translate the sky into structure. The pyramid, then, becomes the end point of that learning. The moment when humans took the order of the cosmos and turned it into geometry you could touch. If you step back from the mathematics and just look at them, the pyramids radiate a kind of calm certainty. There's no chaos in their lines, no wasted gesture. Every stone contributes to the balance of the whole. It's not hard to see why they became symbols of eternity. In the language of stone, simplicity is the truest form of permanence. And maybe that's part of the message they carry, that the more perfectly something is balanced, the longer it can survive. It's interesting, too, that these monuments were built in groups, not a single isolated structure, but a family of them. Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure, each with its own smaller satellites, temples and causeways. Together they form a pattern, almost like a constellation drawn on the ground. Some researchers believe this layout mirrors the stars of Orion's belt, while others think it represents a more earthly symbolism, balance, harmony, lineage. Either way, the repetition suggests they weren't just building for individual glory. They were participating in something larger, a shared design that transcended personal reigns. Even the materials tell a story of ambition. The core stones, mostly limestone, were quarried locally, but the granite used for the inner chambers came from Aswan, nearly 500 miles to the south. Transporting those blocks along the Nile required coordination on a massive scale. Barges, workers, timing and mathematics all converged into one goal, the translation of landscape into monument. When you imagine the sheer logistics of it, it feels almost impossible that such precision could have been achieved without detailed planning. Yet somehow they did it, and they did it so well that the structure still aligns perfectly to the Earth today. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these blueprints is that they outlasted the language that named them. The hieroglyphs, once vivid and full of meaning, eventually faded from use. The stories of the builders were lost to time. Even their names became uncertain. But the geometry remained legible. A triangle doesn't need translation. A proportion doesn't require context. These are universals. So maybe the builders knew, even then, that language would fade but mathematics would not. They may have built their message in a code that any intelligent being, human or otherwise, could someday read. Imagine if our world ended and future archaeologists found only our structures. Skyscrapers collapsed, glass long gone, metal corroded away. What would remain? The foundations, perhaps. The geometry of our cities might still tell a story. Right angles, grids, circles, patterns that reveal intention. The pyramids are the same. They're the foundation stones of an ancient thought process that still speaks clearly despite the erosion of everything else around it. What's fascinating is how these ideas about proportion and balance continue to appear throughout history, as if inherited subconsciously. The golden ratio surfaces in Greek temples, in Renaissance paintings, in modern design. Architects rediscover the same relationships again and again, as if they're wired into human perception itself. Maybe they are. Maybe the same sense of harmony that guided the pyramid builders still lingers in us, a quiet recognition of what feels right when we see it. If you could stand beside one of those ancient engineers as they worked, you might be surprised by their calm. There's a precision in ancient craftsmanship that suggests not frenzy, but patience. Each block placed not as a single act, but as part of a rhythm, a heartbeat of labour extending over decades. To build something that takes generations to complete requires a different kind of mind, one that measures success not by immediate results, but by endurance. It's the long view of time, the kind of thinking that feels almost alien to our age of urgency. And yet that's perhaps what makes the pyramids feel so grounding today. In a world where technology changes by the minute, there's something profoundly reassuring about structures that have looked the same for 45 centuries. They remind us that permanence is possible, that human hands once created something the planet itself seems to respect. When you stand before them, even in photographs, there's a sense that they know something about survival we've forgotten. That may be the real blueprint, and not the measurements, not the ratios, but the philosophy. Build with purpose. Align with the world around you. Think beyond your own lifetime. The rest is detail. If the pyramids are indeed the last message from Earth's first civilization, then perhaps that's what they were trying to tell us. Not a secret of technology or lost magic, but a reminder of balance between ambition and humility, between earth and sky, between time and endurance. As the day fades and the shadows lengthen, the desert grows quiet again. The heat releases its grip, the air cools, and the horizon turns the colour of ancient parchment. The pyramids absorb the last of the sunlight and return to silhouette, their edges sharp against the glow. In that fading light, they look less like ruins and more like instructions, diagrams left open for interpretation, waiting patiently for the next civilization to read them. Somewhere in the shifting sand at their base, the wind begins its slow work again. Each grain moving, each ripple changing the shape of the dunes, yet the stones remain where they always have. Perhaps that's the truest symbol of all, the reminder that the world changes constantly, but some ideas are steady enough to stand through it. The pyramids aren't just ancient. They're current, still functioning as they always have, measuring the passage of time by refusing to yield to it. And as we continue our journey, it's that persistence that guides us forward. Because if these monuments are the blueprints of forever, then the next question isn't just how they were built, but what they were trying to say through their design. What kind of voice could speak so clearly without ever making a sound? If you look long enough at the pyramids, something strange begins to happen. They stop looking like buildings and start to feel more like sentences. Each angle, each proportion, each shadow seems to carry meaning. You don't have to be an engineer or a mathematician to sense it. You can simply stand in front of them, let your eyes trace the slope of the stones, and notice how they seem to be saying something, not in words, but in relationships. Geometry becomes language. It's a conversation without speech, a kind of communication older than writing, older than any alphabet. It might sound abstract, but there's nothing mystical about it. Geometry has always been our way of talking to the world in its own terms. When you draw a circle or measure a line, you're not inventing anything. You're describing what already exists. The rules of proportion, symmetry, and balance are the same everywhere. whether in a shell spiral, a snowflake's pattern, or the orbit of a planet. To build something that follows those rules is to speak fluently in the universal language of form. The pyramid builders, whether consciously or intuitively, seem to understand that. Their structures aren't random, they're deliberate expressions of ratio and alignment. The slope of the Great Pyramid, for instance, forms an angle of about 51.8 degrees. That specific angle creates a relationship between height and base that approximates the value of pi when the perimeter is compared to the circumference of a circle. It's as if the builders embedded the concept of the circle, the symbol of completeness, into a square foundation, and let it rise toward the sky as a triangle. Circle, square, triangle. The three simplest shapes, united in one form. That combination has appeared throughout human history. Artists, architects, and philosophers have all returned to it as a symbol of harmony between heaven, earth, and humanity. The circle often represents the infinite, the divine, the celestial. The square represents the physical, the stable, the earthly. The triangle becomes the bridge, the ascent from one to the other. Whether or not the builders of Giza thought in those exact terms, their design achieves the same result. The pyramid is both a tomb and a translation, a stone equation expressing the relationship between the eternal and the temporal. Walk around its base and you begin to notice how your perception changes with every step. From one angle, it looks enormous and immovable. From another, almost delicate, tapering to a fine point that disappears into the sky. Its sides catch the light differently throughout the day, turning from gold to orange to deep violet as the sun moves. The structure never changes, but its face does, a reminder that perspective is part of its design. It was built not just to exist, but to be seen, to interact with light, to engage the human eye as part of its message. Inside the pyramid, geometry becomes even more precise. The narrow passages and chambers are aligned along axes that seem to follow the stars. The so-called Queen's Chamber points roughly towards Sirius, while the King's Chamber aligns with Orion's belt. These alignments are more than architectural choices, they're gestures of dialogue. The builders weren't just constructing a resting place for their dead, they were connecting Earth to the sky, encoding relationships between human existence and cosmic order. In a way, they turned architecture into astronomy. That kind of intention changes how we interpret what they left behind. It means that the pyramid wasn't just a static monument. It was dynamic, interacting with its environment, light, shadow, and the movements of celestial bodies. Every solstice, every equinox, every shift in the heavens was mirrored in the play of illumination across the stone. It's possible that certain alignments created moments of perfect symmetry, times when the sun or a star would shine precisely through a passage, or cast a shadow that completed the geometry. Imagine standing there thousands of years ago, watching that moment happen. The builders had predicted it. The design had made it inevitable. That moment would have felt like a response, as though the sky itself was answering their work. To communicate through geometry requires faith in consistency. It means trusting that whoever sees your message in the future will understand the same relationships you did, that the principles of symmetry and proportion will remain universal. That's a remarkable form of optimism. It assumes a continuity of intellect, that minds separated by millennia can still share comprehension. Even without language, even without words, the message remains readable. It's a conversation across time carried by shape alone. Modern mathematicians still talk about geometry as a kind of music. Ratios create harmony in sound, but they also create harmony in space. When you hear a perfect chord, it feels balanced because the frequencies of the notes relate in simple ratios. The same happens visually. When you look at a structure built on balanced proportions, your brain recognizes the harmony instinctively. You don't have to calculate anything, you just feel it. The pyramids achieve that effortlessly. Their symmetry isn't rigid, it's soothing. The eye rests comfortably on their lines, the mind settles into their order. It's as if they were built not just to be seen, but to calm. There's something profoundly human in the choice to build beauty into permanence. Function alone would have been easier. A square block, a mound, a cairn, all could have marked a burial site. But the builders chose geometry, the universal language of meaning. They wanted their work to express something, even if they couldn't be there to explain it. Maybe they believed that shapes could speak where words could not. Maybe they were right. Thousands of years later, their message still feels clear, even if we can't translate it into sentences. It's worth remembering that geometry wasn't always an abstract science. In the ancient world, it was sacred. The Egyptians, Greeks, and Babylonians all treated it as a bridge between the physical and the divine. To measure accurately was to participate in creation itself, to mirror the order they saw in the heavens. When they built temples, they weren't just constructing spaces for worship, they were recreating the cosmos in miniature. The same proportions that governed the movement of the stars were believed to bring harmony to human structures. The pyramid, in that sense, may have been the ultimate act of imitation. Earth echoing the sky through form. You can see that principle repeated across the ancient world. Stonehenge in England aligns with the solstices. The temples of Teotihuacan in Mexico mirror the path of the Milky Way. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia stack their layers toward heaven in a similar fashion. It's as though different cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, were all speaking the same visual language. They built shapes that connected them to the cosmos, and geometry was the grammar that made that communication possible. What makes the pyramids of Egypt unique is their silence. They contain no grand inscriptions on their outer faces, no long narratives explaining their purpose. They don't try to persuade or proclaim. They simply exist, perfectly measured, letting the shape itself do the speaking. That restraint might be their most eloquent feature. In a world full of noise and symbols, a pure form can say more than 1,000 words. Even the location of the pyramids may carry meaning. They stand on the west bank of the Nile, the direction of the setting sun, associated with the realm of the dead. To the east, across the river, lies the land of the living, the rising sun, the promise of renewal. The causeways connecting the temples to the pyramids trace that transition from east to west, from life to death, dawn to dusk, beginning to end. The entire landscape becomes a diagram of existence. Every element corresponds to something larger, as if the builders were turning the geography itself into a story about the cycle of being. It's tempting to imagine how they might have explained their choices if we could ask them. Would they speak of gods, of mathematics, of beauty? Or would they simply say that the shape felt right? Sometimes knowledge doesn't need justification. Sometimes it's enough to recognize a truth through intuition. Perhaps the pyramid's proportions emerge not from calculation but from observation, watching how sunlight fell on hills, how shadows moved, how the stars arched above. Out of those observations grew a shape that felt natural, inevitable, correct. That's part of what makes geometry so fascinating. It's both rational and intuitive. You can prove its theorems, but you can also feel its truth. The angle of a slope, the balance of a form. These are things you can sense even without mathematics. When early builders tested designs, they probably relied as much on instinct as on measurement. Over time, their instincts became tradition, and tradition became architecture. By the time of the pyramids, those instincts had reached their peak. Inside the chambers, where light rarely enters, the geometry becomes something you can feel rather than see. The air is still. The walls close in at precise angles. The sound of your own movement echoes with uncanny clarity. It's not an accident. The proportions of those spaces create acoustic effects that amplify even small sounds. Some researchers have suggested that this might have been intentional, perhaps for rituals, perhaps for meaning. When sound behaves predictably within shape, it becomes part of the design. Another layer of geometry, one made of vibration rather than stone. That idea, that even sound and space could form part of a message, adds another dimension to what the builders were doing. They weren't just creating a structure to be seen from the outside, they were crafting an experience. To enter a pyramid is to move through geometry, to feel proportion physically. The height of each passage, the width of each chamber, the slope of each corridor, all conspire to create a particular rhythm of movement. You bend, you climb, you ascend. It's architecture as journey, form as metaphor. And yet the message isn't didactic. It doesn't tell you what to think. It invites reflection. The shapes don't explain. They reveal slowly through perception. That's why they remain so endlessly fascinating. Every person who looks at them finds something different. To some, they're scientific achievements. To others, spiritual symbols. To many, simply beautiful. Geometry allows for that flexibility because it's universal but personal. It meets you wherever you stand. Think about the way the human brain responds to pattern. We're wired to recognize order, to find meaning in symmetry. That instinct is older than language. It's part of how we navigate the world, how we distinguish safety from chaos. When we see balanced forms, our bodies relax. When we see disorder, we tense. The pyramids, with their perfect order, trigger that primal sense of calm. They're not just ancient, they're neurologically satisfying. Maybe that's part of why they continue to draw us. We don't just admire them, we resonate with them. If the builders wanted to leave a message for the future, geometry was the perfect medium. Language evolves, cultures vanish, but numbers stay the same. Ratios don't care about translation. 2 + 2 = 4 in every tongue. The relationship between a circle's circumference and its diameter remains constant no matter who calculates it. So perhaps the pyramids are exactly what they appear to be. Not mysteries to decode, but demonstrations of understanding. Proof that their makers grasp something timeless about the way the universe organizes itself. That in itself is a form of speech. Not one directed at gods or kings, but at whoever might come next. A quiet statement saying, "We understood." You can almost hear it in the silence of the desert, beneath the wind and the shifting sand, the faint hum of proportions that haven't changed in thousands of years. That's what geometry does. It endures. It doesn't just survive time, it speaks through it. As twilight approaches, the light once again touches the edges of the stones, tracing invisible diagrams across their faces. The air cools, the colour drains from the sky, and for a brief moment the pyramids seem to glow from within. The geometry catches the last of the day and gives it back in reflection. You could almost believe that the builders planned for that too. The daily dialogue between sunlight and shadow, energy and matter, day and night. Each one defining the other, both essential to the balance. When the stars appear, the conversation continues. The same constellations the builders once tracked still rise and set in the same patterns. The Earth has turned millions of times since they first aligned those stones, yet the geometry still fits. Their message remains consistent, their voice steady. They spoke in forms that outlast the collapse of empires, the fading of languages, even the slow drift of continents. It's hard not to feel small before that kind of persistence, but it's also comforting. It means that meaning itself can survive if built carefully enough. Somewhere out there, perhaps in another galaxy, intelligent beings might use geometry too, measuring their worlds, mapping their skies. If they ever came here, they might recognize the shapes at Giza as something familiar. Not alien, but kindred. Triangles, symmetry, alignment. They'd understand instantly. They'd see the same relationships we see, the same ratios, the same logic of form. They might realize that whoever built these shapes understood the same universal truths they do. And in that realization, communication would already exist. No translation required. That's the real power of geometry. It's not just a tool for building, it's a bridge. A way for minds, separated by distance or time, to meet in understanding. The pyramid builders may never have imagined that their work would last this long, but they built as if they did. Their faith in geometry ensured that their voices wouldn't fade. They spoke clearly, precisely, through stone and angle and proportion, and we, thousands of years later, are still listening. The wind returns across the plateau, brushing against the stones, carrying fine grains of sand that whisper against the surface. The shapes remain unchanged, steady against the slow erosion of centuries. Somewhere within those silent measurements, the builder's message continues. Not loud, not urgent, just consistent. The kind of voice that doesn't demand to be heard but waits patiently to be understood. And as we keep looking, we begin to realise that the message may not end with what's visible. The stones we see might be only the surface of a larger pattern, one that connects ground to sky, past to future, human to cosmos. The next step, then, is to look upward, to trace those lines beyond the horizon, where geometry meets light and stars begin to answer back. The desert changes slowly, almost too slowly for a human life to notice. A dune moves a few metres in a century, a breeze shapes a ridge, a single stone shifts half an inch in a decade. But across millennia, even that gentleness becomes transformation. Cities rise, crumble and disappear beneath what seems like stillness. The sands that cover the Giza Plateau have done this before, and they will do it again. Beneath them, the memory of lost civilizations waits patiently, not erased, just waiting to be remembered. When people talk about lost civilizations, the imagination tends to go straight to legend. Atlantis, Lemuria, Hyperborea, names whispered through centuries of speculation. Myths about great cultures that reached impossible heights before vanishing without a trace. Most scholars dismiss them as stories born from human nostalgia, our way of explaining ruins we didn't understand. But myths have a way of carrying fragments of truth. Sometimes, behind the exaggeration, there's a faint echo of something real. Maybe not an advanced technological world with glowing cities, but a civilization of understanding, one that thought differently, measured differently, remembered differently. Every discovery that pushes back the timeline of human sophistication adds weight to that possibility. Göbekli Tepe, the site of massive carved pillars in southeastern Turkey, was built at a time when humans were thought to be simple foragers. No cities, no farms, no metal, yet there it stands. Deliberate, symmetrical, monumental. Whoever built it knew how to quarry, shape and arrange stone on a scale no one expected from that era. When archaeologists realised it was more than 11,000 years old, they had to reconsider the story of civilization itself. If people that early could organise, design and build something like that, what else might have existed? Perhaps erased by floods, covered by forests, or, like Giza, buried under sand. It's humbling to think that the timeline we teach, neat and linear, may be only one version of a far more tangled reality. Civilizations might not just rise once and move steadily forward. They might rise, fall, and rise again, each one inheriting whispers from the one before. The pyramids could be part of that inheritance, not the first monuments, but the last survivors of a lineage that began long before recorded history. Archaeology, for all its rigour, often reads like detective work done with missing pages. The evidence we have is only a fraction of what once existed. Most materials vanish with time. Wood decays, metal rusts, even stone erodes under centuries of wind and rain. What survives is what nature allows to survive, and nature has her own sense of preservation. In deserts, the dryness keeps things intact. In jungles, life reclaims everything. In oceans, salt and current consume almost all. So what we know of the past is largely shaped by where we happen to look, and what happens to remain. Imagine how much of our own world would vanish if seen from 10,000 years in the future. The plastics, the steel, the glass, all gone or transformed. Only the strongest foundations would remain, the simplest forms of geometry carved into rock or reinforced concrete. If someone found them, they might guess at our existence, our patterns, our technology, but the meaning behind it all would be mostly gone. That's how we see the ancients. We have the structures but not the context. The pyramids are still speaking, but their words are fragmented, missing half the alphabet. This gap between what was and what remains creates a kind of mystery that both fascinates and frustrates. It invites speculation, sometimes reckless, sometimes brilliant. Theories stretch from the scientific to the mystical. Advanced prehistoric societies, visitors from the stars, survivors of global cataclysms. Most of those ideas drift toward fantasy, but beneath them lies a simple truth. Our past is larger than we've been able to see. The Earth has been home to humans for hundreds of thousands of years, and most of that time is unwritten. The story of civilization may have chapters buried far deeper than we've yet read. Consider the Younger Dryas period, a sudden global cooling around 12,800 years ago that followed the end of the last ice age. Evidence suggests it was triggered by a massive event, possibly a comet impact or a sudden flood of meltwater disrupting ocean currents. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic. Climate changed rapidly, ecosystems collapsed, coastlines shifted. If human cultures had begun to organise by then, they would have faced an apocalypse on a scale we can hardly imagine. Entire regions could have been lost beneath rising seas. Populations could have scattered. What remained would have been fragments, survivors rebuilding from memory, passing down stories of the world that came before. Over time, those memories would have turned into myths. The flood myths found in nearly every ancient culture might be echoes of that memory. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the story of Noah, from the Aztec tales of a deluge to Hindu texts, describing the submergence of earlier ages, the pattern repeats. The world was once destroyed by water, and only a few survived to begin anew. Maybe those are more than symbolic. Maybe they're recollections distorted by time but rooted in truth. If so, then the first civilization wasn't entirely lost. Its message survived in story, and perhaps also in stone. The pyramids, viewed through that lens, become a monument to continuity. They could represent not just Egypt's power, but humanity's determination to endure. Perhaps their builders inherited designs or ideas from an older culture, one that understood the value of building with permanence in mind. Maybe the knowledge of geometry, astronomy and construction wasn't discovered from scratch each time, but relearned, preserved in fragments, passed down through oral tradition or simple observation until it found new expression in Giza's limestone and granite. There's a quiet dignity in that possibility. It suggests that no civilization ever truly disappears. Its knowledge may scatter, but it never vanishes completely. Pieces resurface in unexpected places. A design repeated, a myth remembered, a star alignment copied from memory. Humanity in that sense behaves like the desert wind. We spread, we drift, and we carry with us grains of what came before. The pyramids might be where some of those grains settled again, reshaped into permanence. It's easy to underestimate the resilience of memory. Even without writing, human beings are extraordinary at preserving ideas through story and ritual. A song, a pattern of stars, a building orientation, these can all carry information. Indigenous cultures around the world still encode astronomical, environmental and historical knowledge in oral tradition that spans tens of thousands of years. Those systems of memory don't look like modern archives, but they serve the same function. They remember. If such practices existed in prehistory, it's not impossible that technical knowledge, how to measure stars, how to shape stone, how to build in harmony with nature, could have survived long after its origin. Every generation reinterprets the past according to what it needs to understand about itself. For the Greeks, Egypt represented wisdom. For medieval scholars, it was a symbol of a lost knowledge. For modern science, it's a puzzle of engineering. But beneath all those interpretations is a common thread. a recognition that these monuments contain something older than the stories written about them. They don't just remind us of Egypt, they remind us that we once knew how to think on the scale of eternity. That way of thinking is rare today. Our world moves quickly, measuring success in years, not centuries. We build for function, not for permanence. The idea of constructing something meant to last beyond our lifetime feels almost alien. But in those ancient structures there's evidence of a different kind of ambition, one not driven by profit or conquest, but by continuity. To build something that could survive for thousands of years requires imagining a future that might not include you. It requires trust that your work will matter to people you will never meet. That's the quiet lesson hidden in the memory of lost civilizations. Even when their names fade, their intentions survive. You can feel it in the balance of the pyramids, in the alignment of temples, in the precision of carvings weathered smooth by time. These things aren't just art or technology, they're continuity itself made visible. Every time a civilization reaches for permanence, it leaves behind a trail of understanding that becomes the foundation for the next one. Some archaeologists have begun to describe this process as cultural recursion, the way knowledge folds back into itself through rediscovery. We lose information, then regain it in new ways, often without realizing it. Mathematics, for instance, may have been discovered more than once. Navigation, agriculture, metallurgy. Each could have emerged independently in different times and places, or re-emerged after being forgotten. The pyramids fit neatly into that idea. They could be both a culmination and a rediscovery, the echo of something that had already been known before being lost. If that's true, then the story of civilization isn't about one straight ascent from primitive to advanced. It's a series of waves, surges of knowledge followed by silence, peaks of understanding followed by forgetting. Each wave builds on the remnants of the last, and in between, the world rests, covered in sand, waiting for the next tide of memory to rise. In that pattern, the pyramids aren't anomalies, they're anchors. They tie one wave of humanity to the next. They say, we learned this once, don't let it be lost again. Maybe that's the message Earth's first civilization left behind. Not an explanation, but a reminder. That knowledge, to survive, must be rebuilt again and again, carved into something the world itself will protect. When night falls over the desert, it's easy to imagine the silhouettes of older monuments hidden beneath the dunes, smaller, rougher, more eroded. Maybe there were others before these, now buried too deep to find. Maybe the first civilization didn't vanish completely. Maybe it transformed, leaving pieces of itself behind in stone and story, waiting for us to notice. If so, then every discovery we make, every new excavation, isn't just uncovering history, it's continuing a conversation. The desert wind moves softly, brushing away footprints, smoothing the sand. What was visible today may be gone tomorrow, and what was hidden yesterday may rise again. That's how memory works too. It hides, it resurfaces, it changes shape. The pyramids stand not as interruptions in that cycle, but as its proof. They've been buried and uncovered before. They've been forgotten and rediscovered. Yet they persist, carrying with them the voice of those who once understood that even the act of remembering requires endurance. As we look deeper into what they built, into the stones and angles and hidden chambers, we start to see not just the architecture, but the psychology of those who made it. They must have known that one day their cities would fade, their empires would fall, and their language would die. But they built anyway, because permanence is not about eternity. It's about intent. It's about declaring that what we do, what we know, what we are, deserves to be part of the world's memory. In that sense, the pyramids are not relics, they're instructions. They remind us that memory needs a vessel, and sometimes the best one isn't paper or data, but geometry itself. Something simple enough to last and meaningful enough to be rediscovered. The first civilization, if it existed, might have understood that perfectly, that to outlive your world you must build something that the world itself will keep. And so, the memory continues, layered beneath sand, woven into myth, encoded in stone. The pyramids aren't the end of that story, just the most visible part of it. As we move forward, the next step is to follow that pattern upward, toward the connection between those stones and the stars above them, the place where memory leaves the ground and begins to trace its message in the sky. The night above the desert is nothing like the night above a city. There, the darkness is real. It isn't the absence of light, but the presence of depth. Every star looks sharper, nearer, as if the sky itself leans closer to the earth to be heard. The pyramids, in that quiet, are not silhouettes. They are part of the horizon, shapes drawn by the same hand that scattered the constellations. It's easy to understand why the ancients built their monuments this way, rising toward that vastness. For them, the sky wasn't empty. It was a language, and the stars were its letters. The people who built these structures must have spent lifetimes watching those lights move. Night after night, generation after generation, they recorded the rising and setting of the stars, the way certain constellations drifted with the seasons, the steady march of Orion across the heavens. They knew when the Nile would flood by the appearance of Sirius, when the year would begin, when the balance of light and darkness would shift. Their calendar was written in the sky, and the pyramids became its punctuation marks. When you align a building with the heavens, you're not just marking directions, you're synchronizing the earth with the cosmos. The Great Pyramid is aligned so precisely that its sides face the cardinal points of north, south, east, and west more accurately than most modern buildings. But that orientation isn't just practical, it's symbolic. North and south trace the axis of the planet itself, the invisible line around which everything turns. To align with that is to declare that your creation belongs not only to Earth, but to the larger system it moves within. The ancient Egyptians didn't think of the sky as separate from the ground. They believed it was the mirror of the world below, that every river, every mountain, every monument had its counterpart among the stars. In that way of thinking, the pyramids weren't simply placed where they fit best. They were positioned to reflect a pattern written in the heavens. The constellation of Orion, representing Osiris, the god of rebirth, was of special importance. Some researchers have proposed that the three pyramids at Giza mirror the stars of Orion's belt, slightly offset from one another, following the same diagonal. Whether by design or coincidence, the alignment is close enough to be more than poetic. It's as if the builders took the sky, folded it down and pressed it gently into the earth. There's a kind of humility in that act. To build according to the stars is to accept that human work is part of something larger. It acknowledges that perfection isn't invented but discovered, that balance already exists in the universe, and our task is simply to align ourselves with it. For the builders, that alignment wasn't metaphorical. It was literal. They watched the stars rise along the horizon and mark the moment when the heavens and the earth met in symmetry. Then they built. To modern minds, it might seem unnecessary to link architecture to astronomy, but to the ancients there was no separation between science and spirituality. Observing the cosmos was an act of reverence, and constructing in harmony with it was a way to participate in the rhythm of creation. The pyramid, in that sense, isn't just a monument to the dead, it's a model of the universe. Its base represents the solid ground of human existence, and its apex points toward the celestial realm, a meeting point between matter and meaning. Every culture that has looked to the stars seems to have felt the same impulse. Across the world, ancient structures align with celestial events. The solstices at Stonehenge, the equinox sunrise at Chichen Itza, the lunar cycles at Nabta Playa. These alignments weren't decorative. They were practical calendars, spiritual symbols, and perhaps even messages, expressions of humanity's awareness that we belong to a much larger rhythm. When the builders of Giza set their stones to match the heavens, they were joining that ongoing dialogue. The idea that stone and star could speak to each other isn't as strange as it sounds. Light travels across unimaginable distances, and yet it touches the earth with precision. A single beam of sunlight can enter a temple exactly on the same day each year, striking the same spot, illuminating the same symbol. That consistency means that the builders knew not just the patterns of the sky, but how to predict them. They understood precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis, and compensated for it in their designs. Such understanding would have taken centuries of observation, an unbroken chain of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. When we talk about the pyramids as messages, this is what we mean. The message isn't written in words, it's written in alignment, in proportion, in timing. Each shadow, each shaft of light, each precise angle is part of a sentence spoken across thousands of years. The builders didn't expect their language to be translated. They trusted that whoever looked closely enough would feel its meaning. Inside the Great Pyramid, narrow shafts extend outward from the inner chambers, angled towards specific stars. Some align with Orion, others with Sirius and other bright points in the southern sky. These aren't random tunnels. They act as celestial pointers, marking the places in the heavens where certain stars would appear during key times of the year. For the ancient Egyptians, those stars weren't distant suns. They were divine, symbols of eternity, souls of gods and kings. To connect a burial chamber to those stars was to ensure that the spirit could rise along that path, returning to the cosmic order. The pyramid, therefore, wasn't just a tomb. It was a vehicle, a map of the heavens carved in stone. This merging of architecture and astronomy creates something extraordinary. The pyramid doesn't only exist in space, it exists in time. Its design responds to cycles that repeat endlessly. Days, seasons, precession, the eternal return of the same stars. To build such a structure is to create a kind of permanence that mirrors the cosmos. The stones are heavy, but the idea behind them moves with the stars, unchanged across millennia. Some researchers have suggested that the pyramid's dimensions might also encode measurements of the Earth itself. The ratio between its height and base approximates the curvature of the planet. The perimeter of its base relates closely to the circumference of the Earth at the equator. Whether these correspondences were intentional or not, they reflect an understanding of scale, a sense of proportion that connects human creation to planetary reality. It's as if the builders were saying, "We know where we are." There's something comforting in that thought. In a world so vast where the stars can make us feel small, the act of aligning our structures with them becomes a declaration of belonging. The builders weren't intimidated by the cosmos, they worked with it. They didn't see the heavens as unreachable, but as partners in design. The pyramid's peak points toward the sky not in defiance, but in harmony. It's a gesture of participation, as though to say, we too are part of this order. Light and shadow played as much a role in that conversation as stone and geometry did. At dawn and dusk, the sun transforms the pyramids into instruments of time. Their edges cast shadows that move predictably across the sand, marking the passage of hours and seasons. During equinoxes, the balance of light falls evenly on each face, a moment of perfect symmetry between night and day. At solstice, the light tilts, stretching the shadow to its longest reach. The builders could have used these moments to track time, but perhaps also to remind themselves that time itself was cyclical, that even endings were beginnings waiting in rotation. To watch the sun rise between those ancient stones must have been a quiet revelation. The first light of day, sliding along lines measured centuries earlier, would have felt like confirmation, proof that the design still held, that the world was still in tune. Even now, thousands of years later, the same thing happens. The same sun, the same shadows, the same geometry. The fact that it still works is a message in itself. The language of stone and star remains fluent. In some ways, the pyramids are less about the past and more about continuity. They show that our ancestors didn't see time as a straight line, but as a circle, a rhythm to which everything returns. Each day's sunrise echoes the first, each generation builds upon the last. The connection between heaven and earth isn't just symbolic, it's real, visible, measurable. The builders knew that to align with the cosmos was to participate in its endurance. There's a subtle beauty in how this understanding survived long after the reasons for it were forgotten. Later cultures continued to align temples, altars and cities with celestial events, often without knowing why. The impulse remained, to face the sunrise, to mark the equinox, to measure time through shadow and light. The knowledge had become instinct, woven into the human relationship with the sky. Even today we look up and feel the same pull. We chart the stars, launch satellites, study cosmic radiation, still trying to read the same language our ancestors once understood through geometry alone. Perhaps that's what the pyramids have been teaching us all along. That the universe speaks in patterns, and that meaning isn't something we impose on it, but something we notice when we look closely enough. The stones are only half the sentence, the stars complete it. Together, they form a dialogue that continues even when no one is listening. In the deep silence of the desert night, that dialogue is almost audible. The air cools, the stars brighten, and the earth itself seems to hum. The pyramids stand unmoving, yet their meaning feels alive, expanding outward with each passing moment. Somewhere above them, Orion still crosses the sky, his belt perfectly aligned, his presence as constant as ever. The same stars that guided the builders still guide us, though we call them by different names. The conversation has never stopped. We've just forgotten that we were part of it. That's the quiet power of the language of stone and star. It doesn't demand translation. It reminds us gently that we are made of the same elements as the universe we study. The same atoms forged in stars now rest in the hands that build, the eyes that measure, the minds that wonder. To understand that is to understand that communication across time doesn't require words. It requires attention. Somewhere between those points of light and the edges of stone lies a shared memory, one that connects every civilization that has ever looked up and asked, "What's out there?" Maybe the pyramids are the most enduring answer we've ever given. A way of saying, we noticed. We cared. We were here. And as dawn begins to return once more, as the first thin line of gold touches the horizon and the stars fade one by one, the stones begin to warm again. The language of light returns to the surface, picking up exactly where the night left off. The conversation continues, patient and unbroken, as it always has. The air shifts, the shadows move, and for a moment you can almost imagine that the pyramids themselves are listening. Because if stone can hold memory, and light can carry meaning, then perhaps the message isn't just something they left for us. Perhaps it's something still being written, each sunrise adding another word, each alignment another phrase, as the dialogue between earth and sky goes quietly on. The first light touches the pyramids like memory returning to the body. It begins faintly, a thin silver along the horizon, then spreads upward until the sky turns gold and the desert exhales its cool breath. The moment feels familiar, as though the world itself has performed this routine for longer than it remembers. The light is soft but decisive, revealing edges, shapes, angles, the precise geometry that the night had hidden. For the builders of these structures, this was never just sunrise. It was communication. The relationship between the pyramids and light is older than history. Every block was placed with the path of the sun in mind, each face designed to catch or release light at specific times. The structure doesn't merely stand beneath the sky, it interacts with it. The sun's rays glide along its edges like fingers across an instrument, playing a rhythm that repeats every day with absolute consistency. You can almost hear it if you watch long enough. The slow unfolding of shadow, the pause at noon, the retreat toward evening. It's the most ancient clock, and yet more accurate than most we've ever built. To see the pyramids in daylight is to witness how light itself becomes part of their message. Each angle, each surface, each reflection turns sunlight into information. It tells the hour, the season, even the alignment of the Earth in its orbit. Long before mechanical clocks, this was how time was measured, through the dialogue between shadow and stone. It's not hard to imagine the builders watching that play of brightness, reading meaning in its transitions. To them, the pyramid was not static. It was alive, animated by the motion of light, revealing new details as the day passed. At certain moments of the year, particularly during the solstices and equinoxes, the relationship between light and the pyramids becomes almost theatrical. The sun's position aligns precisely with the edges and corners, creating patterns that seem deliberate. Some researchers have suggested that these events marked rituals, celebrations, or turning points in the calendar. Others believe they served as confirmation, proof that the builders' calculations were correct, that the universe and the monument were still in harmony. Whatever the reason, those alignments remind us that light was their language as much as stone was. If you think about it, light is the only truly universal messenger. It travels across time and distance without translation, unchanged since the beginning of the universe. Every ray that touches the pyramids carries with it information about the sun's state, the atmosphere, the tilt of the planet. The builders might not have used those terms, but they understood the principle. They knew that to shape the path of light was to read the rhythm of the cosmos. When sunlight strikes the Great Pyramid, the precision is uncanny. At noon, the shadows almost vanish, falling evenly along each side, making the structure appear weightless for a moment. Then, as the day moves on, the shadow stretches again, long and deliberate, pointing across the desert like a compass hand. The shape of that shadow changes predictably throughout the year, marking a solar calendar visible to anyone with patience. The pyramid becomes both sundial and text, its meaning renewed daily through the turning of the earth. Some ancient temples near Giza seem to amplify this relationship even further. The Temple of the Sphinx, for example, faces directly east, its gaze locked onto the rising sun. During the equinox, the first rays shine directly between the Sphinx's eyes, cutting a perfect line of light that connects the horizon to the monument. That kind of alignment requires more than luck. It requires a deep understanding of astronomy, geometry, and time. It's as if the builders were choreographing a dance between sunlight and stone, a slow, patient movement repeated endlessly across ages. To them, light may not have been just illumination. It was presence, the visible form of divinity, the daily proof that life continued. The sun's rise was not just the start of the day, but a renewal of existence itself. In that context, the pyramids might be seen as instruments for catching that divinity, holding it briefly in their angles before releasing it back to the sky. The entire landscape becomes part of a ritual that repeats without interruption, long after its origin has faded from memory. Modern technology allows us to study these patterns with precision the ancients could only have imagined. Computer models simulate the path of light through every season, showing how certain chambers and corridors align with the sun at specific moments. One theory suggests that sunlight entering the descending passage during the solstice might have illuminated the inner chamber, symbolizing the return of life or the journey of the soul. Whether or not that's true, it captures something essential. The idea that light wasn't merely decoration, it was a message. Even the materials used in the pyramids enhanced this message. The original casing stones, now mostly gone, were made of polished Tura limestone, gleaming white under the sun. When newly built, the Great Pyramid would have reflected light so intensely that it could be seen for miles, shining like a beacon. Some historians think it might have symbolized the connection between Earth and the heavens, a physical manifestation of light's journey. The pyramid wasn't just built to endure, it was built to glow. Imagine what that must have looked like thousands of years ago. The sun rising over the desert, its rays striking a mountain of stone that blazed like a mirror, its edges burning gold against the horizon. From afar, it must have looked as though the earth itself was shining back at the sky, answering sunlight with sunlight. It's not hard to see why people would have viewed that as sacred. In that exchange of light, the divine and the human touched, however briefly. But beyond symbolism, light also serves as a kind of recording device. It writes and rewrites patterns across surfaces every day, etching invisible traces of time. The limestone absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly at night, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of temperature. Over millennia, that process has shaped the stone itself, as if the sun's hand continues to sculpt the monument. Light doesn't just reveal the pyramid, it participates in its evolution. Some physicists studying ancient architecture have pointed out that light, when used deliberately, can encode complex information. A single ray passing through a narrow slit or reflecting off a polished surface can convey precise measurements of time, angle, and motion. The builders might not have spoken of photons or wavelengths, but they understood cause and effect. They used sunlight as data, transforming the act of observation into design. The pyramid becomes, in that sense, not just a building, but a device, a kind of cosmic instrument that measures and mirrors reality itself. Even today, satellite imagery reveals patterns in the layout of the Giza complex that seem designed to interact with sunlight and shadow. The alignments between the pyramids, the Sphinx, and nearby temples create corridors of light during certain seasons. These alignments would have been visible not just to priests or rulers, but to anyone who watched carefully. It turns the entire plateau into a kind of open-air observatory, a calendar, a clock, a stage for the sun's eternal performance. That's perhaps the most astonishing part, the consistency of it all. For thousands of years, through floods, earthquakes, and shifting skies, the light still falls where it was meant to. The message still repeats itself. That kind of precision implies not only intelligence but foresight. The builders knew that they were creating something that would outlast their empires, their gods, even their species if it came to that. The sun would always rise, and as long as it did, their work would still speak. You can test this yourself in small ways. If you visit the site at different times of the year, the light changes character, revealing new aspects of the same geometry. In summer, the sun blazes directly overhead, flattening the structure's depth. In winter, the light strikes at an angle, carving sharper contrasts. Each season produces its own pattern, its own message. It's like a conversation between the pyramid and the sky that never repeats itself exactly, yet always makes sense. That consistency has led some to speculate that the builders were attempting to encode not just astronomical information, but philosophical truth. Perhaps they believed that light itself carried wisdom, that to understand its behaviour was to understand the universe. The pyramid, then, would be a kind of book, written in the language of illumination, readable only through observation. Its text isn't static. It changes with the hour, the season, the weather. It teaches patience, attention, and humility, the qualities required to notice meaning in motion. If you think about the history of science, that idea feels familiar. From Newton's prism to Einstein's theory of relativity, light has always been our greatest teacher. It reveals not only what is visible, but what is fundamental, the nature of time, energy, and space. The builders of the pyramids might not have framed it in those terms, but they participated in the same pursuit, to learn by looking, to understand through alignment. Their methods were architectural, but their curiosity was universal. At night, when the sun withdraws, the lesson continues in reverse. The reflected glow of moonlight traces the same shapes, but softer, slower, as if the sky is whispering the same truths in a different tone. The moon itself, borrowing light from the sun, becomes part of the same chain of communication. The pyramids catch that light too, absorbing and returning it, their pale surfaces faintly glowing against the dark. Even without the sun, they remain engaged in the same dialogue. It's strange to realise how deeply this connection between light and structure mirrors our own understanding of information today. In the modern world, light still carries our messages. Through fibre optics, satellites, lasers, every bit of data that travels across the planet does so as light. The same medium that once illuminated the pyramids now transmits our voices, our thoughts, our histories. The continuity is almost poetic. The builders use sunlight to mark time and meaning. We use it to send ourselves across oceans and space. Different technologies, same principle. Light remembers. If the pyramids truly were a message from Earth's first civilization, perhaps light was their chosen language for a reason. It's incorruptible, consistent, infinite. It moves faster than decay, and it connects every observer, whether human or not, to the same experience. The idea that they might have encoded meaning not in symbols, but in the predictable behaviour of light and shadow makes sense. It's the one form of communication that cannot be lost as long as the sun still burns. As dawn stretches higher, and the light becomes too bright to stare at, the desert changes colour again. The sand shifts from silver to gold, the air warms, the shadows shorten. The pyramids return to their daytime silence, but the message remains in motion. Every moment of brightness is another repetition of the same truth, that knowledge and endurance are bound together. Light reveals, stone preserves, and between them lies continuity. Even now, as modern researchers map every corner of these structures, scanning with lasers and cosmic rays, they're continuing that same work, translating the patterns of light into understanding. The technology is new, but the instinct is ancient. We still seek meaning in brightness and shadow, still look to geometry and illumination to tell us something about who we are. The difference is that we now call it science instead of reverence. But maybe those two words have always meant the same thing. The day moves on, the desert hums quietly in the heat, and the light keeps sliding along the stone as it always has. Somewhere within that silent rhythm lies everything we've ever wanted to know about permanence. Not as defiance of time, but as cooperation with it. The pyramids don't resist decay. They move with it, guided by the same sun that will one day wear them down. They were never built to last forever. They were built to last long enough for light to carry their meaning forward. And so far, it has. And as the sun begins to tilt toward the horizon again, preparing for its descent, the light shifts once more, wrapping the pyramids in soft amber, flattening their shadows, turning them into silhouettes of memory. It feels less like an ending and more like a continuation, as though the same message will be rewritten tomorrow in slightly different words, slightly different rays, a new chapter of the same unbroken conversation between stone and sky. The sun lowers toward the horizon, and the air over the desert thickens with colour. Gold turns to copper, copper to rose, and then, for a few quiet moments, everything seems suspended between day and night. The pyramids stand motionless, but the light around them ripples like water. It's in that stillness that the imagination begins to travel backward, beyond dynasties, beyond the invention of writing, beyond even the memory of history itself. Because there's a question that never quite leaves the mind once it enters it. What if this isn't the beginning of civilization, but the remainder of one that came before? When you look at the pyramids long enough, it's easy to imagine that they might be older than we think. Not the stones themselves, perhaps, but the knowledge behind them, the sense of design, the harmony between architecture and astronomy, the understanding of light and geometry. These feel inherited, as if learned from someone else, somewhere else. There are stories scattered across cultures, old as humanity itself, that speak of a time when the world was different, a time before the flood. The flood appears in nearly every ancient tradition. The Sumerians told of Utnapishtim, the one man spared from the deluge sent by the gods to cleanse the earth. The Hebrews spoke of Noah, who built an ark to preserve life. The Hindus told of Manu, warned by a fish to build a boat before the waters rose. The Greeks remembered Deucalion and Pyrrha, floating on the sea that had swallowed the world. Even in the Americas, stories from the Mayans and the Hopi describe floods that ended earlier ages of humankind. These myths are separated by continents and millennia, yet they tell the same story, of a world washed away and rebuilt from its remnants. For a long time, scholars treated these accounts as metaphor. Floods are powerful symbols of renewal, they said, the washing away of corruption, the cleansing of the earth. But geological evidence suggests there may be more to it than allegory. Around 12,800 years ago, near the end of the last ice age, the Earth underwent a sudden and dramatic shift. Vast glaciers melted rapidly, sending torrents of fresh water into the oceans. Sea levels rose by hundreds of feet. Whole regions that had once been dry land vanished beneath the waves. The coastlines we know today are not the same ones our ancestors walked on. Archaeologists and geologists call this period the Younger Dryas, a time of upheaval that reshaped the planet's climate and geography in just a few centuries. Some researchers believe that a comet impact or massive volcanic eruption may have triggered the melting. Others think it was simply the inevitable end of the Ice Age, accelerated by natural feedback loops. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic. Floodplains turned to seas, fertile valleys drowned, and civilizations, if they existed, would have been wiped away almost entirely. If a culture had flourished before that cataclysm, it wouldn't have left much behind. Most human settlements are built near water, rivers, lakes, coasts. When the seas rose, they would have swallowed everything. The ruins of those cities, if they existed, would now lie deep underwater, covered by sediment and coral, invisible to all but the most determined explorers. Occasionally sonar scans reveal something intriguing. Submerged structures off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean that appear to be man-made. Whether they truly are ancient cities or simply natural formations remains uncertain, but their existence keeps the question alive. If there was a civilization before the flood, its survivors would have moved inland, seeking higher ground. They might have carried fragments of their knowledge with them. How to track the stars, how to measure the earth, how to build with stone so that it would last. Over generations, that knowledge could have become myth, preserved in story, ritual, and design. By the time Egypt emerged along the Nile, those memories may have already been ancient, dimmed by time but still powerful enough to inspire new creation. Perhaps the pyramids are not the dawn of human civilization, but its echo, a reconstruction based on the memory of what once was. That idea might sound speculative, but there are patterns that support it. Civilizations seem to appear suddenly in the archaeological record, already possessing advanced understanding of engineering, agriculture, and astronomy. Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley all emerge with complex societies rather than simple beginnings. How did so much knowledge appear so quickly? The conventional answer is that these were gradual developments compressed by the limits of our evidence. But it's also possible that these societies inherited something. Not machines or technology, but principles, methods, ways of seeing the world that predated their recorded histories. When you think of a flood, it's easy to imagine destruction, but water also preserves. Beneath layers of silt and sand, the traces of older worlds may still exist, sealed away, untouched. The oceans hold more archaeology than all the deserts combined. Yet we've explored only a fraction of the seafloor. Somewhere down there could be the ruins of that forgotten world, resting quietly under the weight of centuries, waiting to be noticed. In recent years, discoveries of submerged landscapes have begun to blur the boundary between myth and history. The Doggerland Plains beneath the North Sea once connected Britain to mainland Europe, home to thriving communities before rising waters covered them. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar images show what appears to be a grid of stone structures 1,000 feet below the surface. Near India's Gulf of Kambat, divers have found artifacts embedded in the seabed dating back far earlier than expected for complex societies. Each discovery adds another layer of possibility, not proof, but whisper. The past may be deeper than we thought. If such a world did exist, what would its message have been? Maybe it wasn't about conquest or wealth, but survival. The pyramids could represent that lesson carved into permanence, that civilizations rise and fall with the Earth's cycles, and that only knowledge built to endure can bridge the gaps between them. The flood, in that light, becomes not just tragedy, but transition. One world ends, another begins, carrying forward fragments of the old. The ancient Egyptians themselves seem to remember something of this. Their myths speak of a time before time, an age of the gods when the world was first created and later renewed after a great flood. They called it Zep-Tepi, the first time. It was said that wisdom and order were established then, passed down through generations until humans took up the task of maintaining balance. To them, the pyramids weren't just tombs. They were instruments of order, stabilizing the connection between heaven and earth, maintaining what the gods had begun. In that sense, the builders weren't creating something new. They were restoring something remembered. Even the placement of the pyramids near the Nile fits this story. The river itself is a symbol of renewal, its annual flooding both destructive and life-giving. Each year it washed away the old and left behind fertile soil for new growth. The builders would have seen in that rhythm a reflection of the larger cycle of the world, the way everything is destroyed and remade. To align their monuments with the stars and the river was to inscribe that philosophy in stone, to declare that memory and rebirth are one and the same. It's not difficult to see why this idea continues to resonate. The thought of an earlier world lost to catastrophe awakens something ancient in us, a mixture of fear and nostalgia. It reminds us that we too are temporary, that everything we build stands on the edge of impermanence, but it also reassures us that even if worlds are washed away, something endures. Knowledge finds a way to survive. It hides in story, in myth, in architecture. It waits for rediscovery. The flood myth, then, is not just about destruction. It's about communication through time. The people who told those stories weren't only warning about divine punishment or natural disaster. They were trying to pass on a truth, that the world changes, that the sea will rise, that memory must be built stronger than the body. The pyramids are the truth made physical, mountains built by human hands to say, we remember and we want to be remembered. Modern science approaches the question from a different angle, but the sentiment is the same. We study ice cores and sediment layers, tracing climate patterns, learning how fragile our equilibrium really is. We've begun to understand that civilization itself depends on stability, on predictable seasons, on steady coastlines, on balance. The ancients may not have known those terms, but they understood the reality. They saw the power of water to both give and take life, and they responded with stone. If the pyramids are messages, perhaps this is one of them, that survival is not guaranteed, and that the only lasting defense against time is understanding. The people before the flood might have learned that too late. The builders of Giza, perhaps remembering that loss, carved their warning into eternity. They didn't write it in words that could fade or languages that could die. They wrote it in alignment, in proportion, in the enduring logic of geometry. Anyone who can measure can read it. Anyone who can see can feel it. As the sun finally sinks below the horizon, the desert cools. The light that remains is faint, a soft reflection from the sky, just enough to outline the pyramids against the dusk. The world looks calm, but beneath that calmness lies movement. The shifting sands, the slow erosion, the quiet turning of the planet. Nothing is still. Not truly. Even the stars above drift over thousands of years, their positions changing slowly in the great clockwork of the cosmos. Everything moves, but some things move so slowly they appear eternal. That's how memory works too. It shifts, it adapts, it hides its edges, but it never stops existing. If there really was a world before the flood, its people might have looked at the same stars we see now, using them to navigate, to measure, to wonder. They might have known that their time was ending, and perhaps before the waters rose they decided to leave behind something that would outlast the sea, something built not on the shore but on the high ground. something that could tell the future that they had been here and that they had known what was coming. The pyramids might be that gesture, not a beginning, but a preservation. Even now, as the desert night returns, the air cooling and the wind beginning to move again, you can almost imagine those older hands laying the first stones, not to mark death, but to declare continuity. They couldn't stop the flood, but they could make sure the memory of their world would float above it. And perhaps that's what survival really means, not avoiding the flood, but leaving behind something that can be rediscovered once the waters recede. The stars begin to reappear, one by one, the same constellations that have watched every age of humanity. Their light travels through the dark, reaching the stones just as it always has. The world below changes, but the dialogue continues. Maybe that's what the first civilization wanted to preserve. Not a name or a story, but a way of listening, a way of remembering that meaning can outlast even the sea. And as the night deepens, the pyramids settle back into their silence, their message carried now not by the sun but by starlight. It's the same story, told again, endlessly, waiting for us to understand that the flood never truly ended. It just changed shape, flowing now through time instead of water, covering the past, revealing the future, carrying both together beneath the same eternal sky. The desert at night feels endless. The stars shimmer as if suspended just above the horizon, and the wind drifts in slow waves across the sand, carrying no sound except its own movement. Standing there, you might think the world has always looked this way, silent and eternal. But beneath that silence lies a question that never fully fades. How much of what we believe about the past is memory, and how much is amnesia? Archaeology is often described as the science of remembering. It tries to rebuild stories from what the earth has buried, to give form back to things time has dissolved. Yet the more we uncover, the more we realise how selective memory can be. The earth remembers in fragments. It keeps what chance allows, a broken pot, a carving, a fragment of bone, each one a single word torn from a book with most of its pages missing. From those fragments, we write histories, confident in our conclusions, though the silence between them is far greater than the sound. The pyramids are a perfect example of that imbalance. They are both presence and absence, immense, tangible, undeniable, and yet surrounded by mystery. We know their measurements, their materials, their alignments. We can calculate their angles, date their stones, scan their interiors, and still, the deeper we look, the less certain we become about why they exist at all. Each discovery solves a detail and opens a larger question. It's as if the pyramids themselves are reminding us that remembering is not the same as knowing. Archaeologists have mapped nearly every visible stone on the Giza Plateau. They've studied tool marks, quarry routes, worker settlements, burial chambers, and fragments of writing. Those findings tell a story of organisation and skill, of thousands of labourers working over decades with remarkable precision. It's an impressive story, but it's also incomplete. There are missing lines in the record, gaps that stretch for centuries, unexplained jumps in knowledge, lost transitions between techniques. The truth may still lie somewhere beneath the sand waiting to be revealed. Or it may be gone forever, erased not by conspiracy, but by time's quiet indifference. That's the difficult thing about archaeology. It's a science that depends entirely on what survives, and survival is never fair. Fire, flood, and erosion decide what remains, not intention. Whole civilizations could rise and vanish without leaving a trace, simply because the materials they built with didn't endure. We call those cultures primitive because we can't see them, but invisibility isn't the same as simplicity. Sometimes the most advanced things disappear fastest. Our own world proves that. Imagine 1,000 years from now, or 10,000. Most of what defines our civilization, our steel towers, our plastic, our circuitry, will have decayed. The forests will reclaim our cities, and the deserts will roll over our roads. What will remain? Maybe a few scattered foundations, a trace of glass, a fossilized pattern of streets. Archaeologists of that distant future might find our ruins and wonder how a society capable of such order left behind so little evidence. They might debate whether we were as advanced as our monuments suggest, or whether our achievements have been exaggerated by myth. It's the same argument we have about the ancients. That thought changes how you look at the pyramids. They may not be exceptional because they're mysterious. They may be mysterious because they're exceptional. They're what survived when everything else didn't. Every grain of sand that covers the old cities, every ruined temple beneath the Nile, every erased name on a broken wall, all of it makes the pyramids stand out more, like the last sentence of a forgotten book. We remember them precisely because they refuse to disappear. But there's another side to that. What if the things we've lost aren't just physical? What if the real amnesia lies in our way of thinking? Modern science is built on evidence, and that's its strength. But it can also create a kind of blindness, an inability to value what can't yet be measured. When evidence is missing, we tend to fill the gaps with dismissal instead of curiosity. The possibility of lost knowledge makes us uncomfortable. It challenges the story we tell ourselves about progress, that humanity moves only forward, never back. Yet history suggests otherwise. Every civilization believes it is the pinnacle of understanding, right up until it isn't. There's a quiet irony in how we approach ancient mysteries. We assume that because we can't explain them easily, they must be simpler than they appear. We reduce them to manageable terms: slave labour, superstition, trial and error. Those explanations are tidy, but they don't always satisfy the feeling you get standing before a monument that has outlasted every empire. The sheer intentionality of the pyramids resists simplification. Their design is too elegant, their endurance too precise. Even if every brick was laid by human hands, there's still something beyond the physical, a continuity of thought, an intelligence that doesn't belong to a single lifetime. That's what archaeology sometimes forgets. It looks for origins in objects instead of ideas, but ideas migrate. They survive in whispers, in symbols, in the orientation of a wall, or the curve of carving. They can move from one culture to another without leaving obvious traces. A mathematical concept, a celestial alignment, a way of cutting stone. These can travel invisibly, passed down through generations who may not even remember where they came from. To find their source, you need more than carbon dating. You need imagination disciplined by observation, the ability to see the connection between fragments, and to admit that some connections are real even before they can be proven. Some researchers have begun to describe this as cognitive archaeology, the study not of artifacts themselves, but of the patterns of thought behind them. It asks what kind of worldview could have produced such precision, such harmony between human creation and natural law. In the case of the pyramids, that worldview seems to have been one that didn't separate science from spirituality. Measurement and meaning were the same thing. To align stone with the stars wasn't just astronomy, it was reverence. That perspective, once lost, is difficult to recover. You can rebuild the techniques, but not the mindset that made them inevitable. If we've forgotten that mindset, then perhaps archaeology isn't just about discovery anymore. It's about remembering how to remember. Every excavation is an act of humility, a recognition that the earth knows more about us than we know about ourselves. The sand is patient, it waits. It doesn't reveal everything at once. It forces us to slow down, to question, to accept uncertainty as part of the process. That's not how modern thinking likes to operate. We prefer answers, conclusions, proofs. But the past doesn't always offer those. Sometimes it only offers presence. The silent weight of stone against the sky, asking questions instead of answering them. When archaeologists study the pyramids today, they use technologies that sound almost futuristic. Ground-penetrating radar, muon tomography, infrared imaging. These tools reveal voids and corridors inside the structures that no one had seen before. Every discovery brings new excitement, but also new confusion. Hidden chambers that defy explanation, alignments that still seem too perfect to have been accidental. We can map them with precision, but we still don't fully understand their purpose. The pyramids remain slightly ahead of us, always a few steps beyond certainty, as if deliberately designed to outlast not just time but comprehension. That might be part of their power. They remind us that knowledge is not ownership. You can measure a monument and still not possess its meaning. Understanding the physical structure doesn't guarantee access to the thought behind it. The ancients knew that. They built with the expectation that the essence of their work would survive even if the details were lost. The pyramids are not just preserved artifacts, they are preserved intentions. To see them is to sense that the builders were speaking to the future, trusting that someone, someday, would listen. Maybe that's what archaeology should be, a form of listening, not just to stones and artifacts, but to silence, to patterns, to the faint resonance of human persistence. When you walk through an excavation site, there's a kind of quiet respect that overtakes you. Each brushstroke of sand reveals not just an object, but a gesture. The mark of someone's hand, someone's thought, frozen in time. In that moment, the distance between past and present disappears. The archaeologist becomes part of the same continuum, the latest in a long chain of people trying to be remembered by remembering others. Amnesia, on the other hand, is easy. It doesn't require effort, only distraction. Civilizations forget when they stop asking questions, when monuments become backdrops instead of mysteries, when the past becomes trivia instead of guidance. That's the risk of living surrounded by so much information. We confuse knowing with understanding. We can name every dynasty, date every artifact, recite every theory, and still miss the feeling of wonder that made those things possible. The ancients built for eternity. We build for convenience. They thought in millennia. We think in minutes. It's not a loss of intelligence, but of attention. Yet attention is exactly what the pyramids demand. They don't reveal themselves to casual glances. They require stillness. To really see them, you have to stop. You have to let your eyes adjust to the brightness, your body to the heat, your mind to the scale. Only then does the geometry begin to speak. The act of looking, of truly observing, is the opposite of amnesia. It's memory made active. It's how we rejoin the conversation the builders began. The difference between archaeology and amnesia, then, might be nothing more than curiosity. One asks, what happened here? The other says, it doesn't matter. Every time we choose to wonder, we push back against forgetting. Every time we uncover something, even a small thing, we remind ourselves that knowledge isn't a straight line. It's a spiral looping back over itself, each discovery connecting to something older, something we didn't realize we'd lost. The pyramids stand as the greatest proof of that. They're not just relics of history, they're reminders of what history itself is. A fragile conversation between what we keep and what we forget. Maybe that's why they've lasted so long. They aren't just memories of a civilization, they're tools for remembering how to remember. As the night deepens, the stars wheel overhead, the same ones that guided the builders and the same ones that watch over the archaeologists working by floodlight below. Each discovery glows briefly in the dark. Another fragment of memory returned to the surface, and in that light, the line between science and story blurs. Archaeology becomes less about solving the mystery and more about participating in it. The desert doesn't rush. It teaches through patience. The sand will give back what it chooses when it chooses. Until then, the pyramids remain, steady, waiting, reminding us that amnesia is temporary, but the truth beneath it is permanent. We may forget, but the world remembers. The stones remember. They always have. And somewhere beneath the surface, beneath all that buried time, something else might still be waiting. The next word in the story, the next piece of the message, Another fragment of the same conversation we've been trying to rejoin since the first moment we decided that silence deserved to be answered. Every civilization wants to speak to the future is one of the quiet constants of being human. This need to leave something behind that says, we were here. Whether it's carved in stone, stored in data, or whispered through story, the impulse is always the same. We build, we write, we record, hoping that time will be kind enough to listen. The pyramids are part of that impulse, but so are we. Every archive, every message sent into space, every photograph stored on a hard drive is a modern version of the same ancient gesture. The difference is that the ancients built their message to last. We build ours to move. When you look at the pyramids through that lens, they become less of a mystery and more of a mirror. They are what permanence looks like when translated into human form. Each block, each alignment, each calculation is an act of communication directed not to their own time, but to all time. The builders couldn't know who would come after them, or what language those people would speak, but they built anyway. They trusted that form itself could speak where words would fail. That kind of faith in communication is rare. We tend to assume that meaning requires translation, that to understand we must share language, culture, or context. But the pyramids remind us that meaning can also live in structure, in pattern, in endurance. You don't need to read hieroglyphs to feel the weight of those stones, to sense the patience that shaped them. The message isn't hidden inside the monument, it is the monument. Permanence itself is the sentence. If you think about it, we've never stopped trying to do the same thing, just in different materials. We send spacecraft beyond the solar system carrying golden records with greetings in every language, hoping that someone, somewhere, might one day find them and understand that we existed. We launch satellites to orbit the Earth indefinitely, full of information about our species. We store petabytes of data in underground vaults, freeze seeds in Arctic ice, encode DNA with fragments of literature. It's all the same conversation, a message addressed not to the present, but to whatever comes next. The pyramids are the earliest known examples of that communication done successfully. They've outlasted every empire, every flood, every translation. They've spoken to cultures that didn't exist when they were built. They've been read as tombs, temples, observatories, symbols, mysteries. Each interpretation a new language added to the same enduring statement. The fact that we're still talking about them proves that the message worked. It didn't need to be specific. It only needed to survive. There's something profound in that simplicity. To communicate across millennia, you don't need technology, you need durability. The medium must outlast misunderstanding. Stone can do that, light can do that, geometry can do that, but language changes too fast. It decays like everything else organic. The builders of the pyramids seem to understand this instinctively. They didn't write their message in script, they wrote it in alignment. They made their meaning something that could not erode. When you imagine the future looking back at us, the comparison becomes uncomfortable. Most of what defines our civilization exists in fragile forms. Our data lives in servers powered by systems that require constant maintenance. Our knowledge, vast as it is, depends on electricity, infrastructure, and context. If those systems failed, how long would it last? Centuries? Decades? Perhaps less. If all that vanished, what physical traces would remain to tell our story? Maybe a few satellites still orbiting above the dead Earth, silent but intact. Maybe a few structures built of concrete and steel, already crumbling. In that sense, the ancients were wiser. They built with time, not against it. Modern messages to the future are more numerous but less certain. We've buried time capsules in schoolyards, stored archives on disks, transmitted radio signals into deep space. Somewhere beyond the orbit of Pluto, the Voyager probes continue to drift, carrying music and greetings, mathematical patterns meant to be universal. The people who built them knew they'd never see where those probes would go, just as the pyramid builders never saw who would stand before their work. Both acts come from the same place. the desire to be heard by someone who may never arrive. It's strange to think of how similar those gestures are. The pyramid points upward, a geometric beacon for the sky. Voyager moves outward, a metallic pyramid of sorts, carrying a message carved into gold. Both rely on endurance rather than context. They don't assume understanding, they assume curiosity. Whoever finds them, whether human or not, will recognize the intent. Someone wanted to be known. Someone wanted to say, "We existed." That desire might be what connects all civilizations across time. It's not the tools or the technologies that matter most, but the will to communicate beyond the present moment. We all live in temporary worlds, but we want to believe that something of us can transcend them. The pyramid does it through stillness, Voyager through motion, and both succeed in ways that are almost poetic. One stays rooted in the earth, the other carries the earth with it. Archaeologists sometimes say that every artifact is a message that survived its sender. It carries intention across time, even if its original purpose is forgotten. A bowl, a carving, a scrap of cloth. Each one is a signal from another life. The pyramids magnify that principle beyond measure. They are not just artifacts, they are entire sentences written in permanence. The builders may be gone, but the intention behind their work still resonates. You can feel it even without knowing the details. It's the feeling of continuity, of human presence stretching unbroken across the ages. When you think about it that way, archaeology and communication become the same discipline. Both are attempts to bridge time. Both depend on patience and interpretation. The difference is that one digs into the past while the other reaches into the future. The pyramids occupy the space between those two directions. They are the hinge of time, the point where remembering becomes prediction. There's an unspoken humility in the idea that we might one day be the subject of the same kind of study. Future archaeologists, human or otherwise, might find the remnants of our cities and interpret them through their own logic, just as we interpret the ancients through ours. They might stand before the cracked remains of our monuments and feel the same sense of awe we feel at Giza. They might wonder what we were trying to say. Maybe they'll find our satellites still circling the planet and see them as our pyramids in orbit, enduring, silent, still speaking in their way. That continuity across ages suggests something about human nature that doesn't change. We are temporary beings obsessed with permanence. We measure time knowing we can't control it, and yet we keep building as if we can. We record, we carve, we launch, we write. It's as though we understand that the only way to resist oblivion is to participate in it, to create something that can be carried by time itself. The pyramids achieve that perfectly. They aren't separate from time. They're shaped by it. Each passing century adds to their story. The erosion, the missing stones, the changes in the desert. All of it becomes part of the same message. They are monuments that grow more meaningful the older they become. It's not immortality, it's evolution. Their purpose was never to stay the same, but to keep being seen. Modern science has begun to think about how to leave messages that might survive millions of years. Warnings engraved in stone near nuclear waste sites, designed to deter future civilizations from digging where they shouldn't. Linguists, artists, and engineers collaborate to create symbols that could be understood by beings who might not share our biology, let alone our language. They study the same principles the ancients once used: geometry, proportion, universality. A triangle will always be a triangle, a circle always a circle. Mathematics doesn't decay. The more we try to speak to the far future, the more we find ourselves thinking like the pyramid builders. The irony is that our modern world, for all its complexity, is fragile compared to theirs. We can communicate instantly across the planet, but our messages vanish as quickly as they appear. A deleted file, a broken server, a lost password, and entire histories can disappear in seconds. The ancients didn't have that problem. They didn't need electricity or storage capacity. They relied on the one thing that has never failed: The persistence of matter under gravity. A block of stone is harder to erase than a data cloud. That difference says something about the philosophy of permanence. The builders of Giza accepted that time would move slowly, that meaning could unfold over millennia. They built for patience. We build for immediacy. Yet deep down, the same desire drives both approaches. We want to reach beyond ourselves. We want to send something forward that can outlast the moment. That longing, quiet but constant, might be the most human thing we have. There's another layer to it too, a kind of responsibility. When you send a message to the future, you're not just saying who you are, you're deciding what the future will know about you. The builders of the pyramids must have understood that. They chose to represent their world not through war or wealth, but through balance and precision. They wanted the future to see their knowledge, not their conflict. They chose endurance over noise. That choice matters. What we choose to preserve says as much about us as what we forget. If we were to send one message today that could last as long as the pyramids, what would it be? What shape would we trust to carry meaning through ages of change? Would it be a monument, a spacecraft, a digital archive? Or would it be something simpler, a pattern, a ratio, a principle? Maybe the best messages aren't complex. Maybe they're the ones that can survive without interpretation, the ones that feel right even when their origin is lost. That's what the pyramids achieved. They don't explain themselves, they simply are, and in their existence they continue to communicate. As the night deepens again and the stars begin to reclaim the sky, the pyramids stand as they always have, massive, silent, yet full of expression. The same light that once touched them now travels through our telescopes, through our satellites, through the thin atmosphere of our communication networks. The same photons that once illuminated the stones now carry our voices across oceans. The medium changes, but the message remains. We are still trying to speak across time. The pyramids remind us that it can be done. That meaning, if shaped carefully enough, can survive the collapse of languages, the shifting of continents, the rising of seas. It only requires patience and the humility to build with both the earth and time in mind. The builders may not have known us, but they built for us anyway. They built for everyone who would ever wonder, and in that act they became our teachers. They show that to leave a message for the future, you don't need to predict what will come, only to trust that someone will care enough to look. The message doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to last long enough for light to find it again. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another dawn begins to form, the first faint line of brightness stretching upward. The desert waits, as it always does, and the stones begin to catch the light once more. Another day, another reading of the same eternal message, written in geometry and patience, repeating quietly into the endless future. There are moments in the desert when time feels suspended, when the air stops moving and even the light seems to hesitate. The horizon becomes an unbroken line between silence and infinity, and everything, including thought, slows to the rhythm of something older than memory. Standing there, surrounded by the pyramids, you begin to realize that they don't just occupy time, they pulse through it. They seem still, but they aren't. They move in the smallest possible way, not in space, but in meaning. Each century adds another layer of understanding, another quiet heartbeat in the long life of their message. If you listen long enough, time itself begins to sound different here. It's not linear. It doesn't rush forward like the clocks we keep on our walls or the calendars that divide our lives. It expands and contracts, breathing through the stones, looping back on itself in ways we can feel, but not measure. The pyramids, by their very existence, defy our usual sense of time. They turn history into geography, something solid, continuous, not unfolding but present. You can touch what someone else built 4,500 years ago, and it still feels recent, still feels alive. In a sense, they are living instruments. The sun, the stars, and the passing of days play them like an endless composition, Their shadows mark not just hours, but epochs. The wind erases and redraws their edges with microscopic patience, and still they endure, reshaping subtly but never fading. Each grain of sand blown against their surface is a tick of a clock too vast for us to comprehend. The pulse beneath time is slow, but it's steady. The pyramids remind us that permanence is not the absence of change. It's change balanced so perfectly that it becomes invisible. You can feel that balance in their proportions. Every line, every angle, every measurement seems tuned to something beyond practicality. Their geometry doesn't just resist decay, it harmonizes with it. The erosion, the weathering, the softening of edges, all of it happens so evenly that the structure maintains its form despite losing mass. It's as if they were designed to age gracefully, to grow old without losing identity. That quality makes them more than monuments. It makes them organisms of stone, breathing with the world's slow heartbeat. Modern measurements show that the Earth itself isn't perfectly still beneath them. The planet shifts, flexes, tilts slightly on its axis, yet the pyramids adapt. Their orientation drifts in harmony with those movements, staying almost perfectly aligned with true north after thousands of years. Some of that may be coincidence, some the result of the builder's extraordinary precision, but the effect feels intentional. They remain in sync with the Earth, as if the builders knew how to align their creation with the planet's pulse. To connect human effort to cosmic rhythm, it's possible that they sensed something we've forgotten, that time is not separate from space, and that to understand one, you must build with the other in mind. The ancients didn't have atomic clocks or equations of relativity, but they had observation, patience, and intuition. They saw the repetition of the stars, the migration of shadows, the cyclical return of the seasons. They understood that everything moves together. The sky, the river, the wind, the heart. To them, time was not an arrow but a circle. Every end was a return, every disappearance a delay. That way of seeing might be the true legacy of the pyramids. They aren't static symbols of the past. They are ongoing participants in the present. Their endurance is not defiance but cooperation. They remain because they move with the world, not against it. When the Nile floods, when the desert expands, when the stars drift across the heavens, the pyramids adjust without effort, as if belonging to a rhythm too deep for us to hear. The pulse beneath time can't be measured with instruments, but it can be sensed. It's in the pattern of civilizations rising and falling, in the persistence of ideas that reappear after being forgotten, in the strange familiarity of new discoveries that feel like remembering. History doesn't repeat itself mechanically. It breathes. The pyramids are like the lungs of that history, inhaling each generation's curiosity and exhaling its wonder. Every era sees them differently. To the Greeks, they were proof of divine proportion. To the Arabs, they were remnants of antediluvian wisdom. To modern archaeologists, they are feats of engineering. To travellers, they are moments of stillness against the noise of the world. The pyramids don't reject any of these interpretations. They absorb them all, adding each one to their quiet dialogue with time. The fact that they mean something different in every age is proof that they are still communicating. The builders must have known that interpretation would change. No one could build something meant to last thousands of years without understanding that the future would be different. That's part of their genius. They made something open-ended, a design that could accommodate infinite meanings. The pulse beneath time flows through that openness. It allows the pyramids to keep speaking long after their original language has vanished. When you stand near them, you can sense that continuity in your own body. The rhythm of your breathing, the steady beat of your heart, the warmth of sunlight on your skin. All of it matches the same patterns that shape these stones. We're not separate from them. We're part of the same flow. The same atoms in your body once drifted through the air over the ancient desert. The same starlight that guided the builders now falls on you. Time, for all its apparent distance, isn't far away. It's layered, overlapping, simultaneous. The pyramids are proof of that simultaneity. They don't belong to the past. They belong to every moment that looks at them. It's curious how much of human history exists to measure time, and yet how little we understand it. We build clocks, calendars, machines that count the movement of electrons, but none of them capture what time feels like. The pyramids do. They measure time not in seconds, but in endurance. Their existence shows what happens when you align human effort with natural rhythm instead of fighting it. Time becomes partnership, not opposition. Every crack in their surface, every weathered edge, every missing stone is part of that partnership. They've aged the way old trees do, changing form but not identity. Their imperfections aren't failures, they're the marks of participation. They've been in conversation with wind and light for thousands of years, and both have left their handwriting on the surface. To touch the stone is to touch a texture written by time itself. The idea that a monument could have a pulse might sound poetic, but it's also literal in its own way. Heat expands the stones during the day, contracts them at night. That daily breathing moves through the structure like a heartbeat, slow but measurable. The stones crack and shift imperceptibly, yet the shape remains intact. Even silence has rhythm. The pyramid listens to the sun and responds without sound. If you step back and think about humanity as a single, long-lived being, the pyramids are like its heartbeats, points of persistence that mark the continuity of consciousness. Each generation that rediscovers them adds another thump to that rhythm. They remind us that the passage of time doesn't erase meaning, it deepens it. What survives isn't what resists time, but what harmonizes with it. In that sense, maybe the builders weren't trying to conquer death at all. Maybe they were trying to join life's larger continuity, to sync themselves with the rhythm of the universe so that their existence wouldn't end, just change form. When we call them tombs, we focus on death, but perhaps they were meant as transitions. The pharaohs buried within weren't meant to rest. They were meant to continue, to move into the pulse that outlasts time. You can almost see that philosophy reflected in the layout of the complex. The causeways linking the pyramids to their temples resemble arteries. The smaller satellite pyramids around the great ones echo cells orbiting a nucleus. The design feels biological, not mechanical, alive, interconnected, responsive. It's as though the builders replicated life's own architecture in stone. The pulse beneath time flows through every level of that design, from the cosmic to the cellular. Even our understanding of time's passage seems to mirror this idea. Physics tells us that time and space are intertwined, that gravity bends them together, that massive objects, like the Earth, like the pyramids themselves, slightly alter the flow of time around them. It's subtle, imperceptible, but real. The presence of something enduring literally slows time in its vicinity, even if only by a fraction of a second. The pyramids may not just symbolize permanence, they create it, distorting the rhythm of time by their sheer mass. It's as if they physically anchor the present to itself. The pulse beneath time, then, isn't something mystical. It's simply the universe in motion, energy shifting, matter settling, stars burning, civilizations remembering and forgetting in cycles. The pyramids endure because they reflect that motion without resisting it. They've survived earthquakes, invasions, and empires, not by strength alone, but by cooperation with the physics of their environment. They don't fight the wind, they guide it. They don't defy gravity, they perfect it. They don't fear time, they inhabit it. That understanding, quiet and patient, may be the real message they carry. Not a secret technology or a lost map, but a philosophy. That endurance comes from rhythm, not resistance. To live in balance with the pulse beneath time is to build in harmony with what lasts. Every civilization that forgets this eventually crumbles, swept away by the same cycles that the pyramids anticipated. But every civilization that remembers becomes part of that same continuity, echoing the heartbeat of the world itself. As night deepens over the desert, the stars rise again, their slow movement across the sky marking another turn of the great clock. The pyramids, Their edges softened by starlight seem to float in the darkness. The temperature drops, the stones contract slightly. A subtle shift that no one notices but that has happened every night for thousands of years. The rhythm continues. Expansion, contraction, light, shadow, silence, wind. The same sequence repeating endlessly. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. Not as sound, but as presence. The pulse beneath time isn't something to be detected. It's something to be felt. It's there in the rhythm of your breath, in the faint vibration of the earth beneath your feet, in the steady movement of the stars above. The same rhythm that guided the builders guides us still. We've just learned to drown it out with noise, but here in the desert there's no noise, only the hum of existence, steady, low and eternal. The pyramids don't break that silence, they join it, they amplify it. They remind us that time isn't something to escape, but something to join, that the goal isn't to outlast the world, but to align with its heartbeat. And as the stars wheel above and the darkness deepens, you begin to feel it, that quiet synchronization, that soft alignment between what moves in the sky and what stands on the ground. It's not a metaphor, it's the real, physical pulse of the universe, the rhythm the builders once understood and recorded in stone. The pyramids still keep that rhythm, still measure it, still echo it back to anyone who's willing to stand still long enough to listen. And somewhere, beneath that rhythm, beneath the slow breathing of the earth, beneath even the shifting of the sands, something deeper continues to move. The same pulse that's been there since the first spark of creation. The same one that will still be there when all our names are forgotten, beating quietly beneath the flow of everything we call time. The horizon begins to pale long before the sun appears. The air over the desert shifts in colour almost imperceptibly, black to indigo, indigo to blue, then to that faint grey light that doesn't belong to day or night. The stars begin to fade one by one, reluctant to leave, and the sand takes on a muted glow, as if remembering the warmth that will soon return. The pyramids wait, as they always do, unmoving but expectant, their edges barely visible in the half-light. This is the moment the world breathes between cycles, when night ends but morning hasn't yet begun. It's the hour when everything seems possible, and nothing demands to be known. The first rays of sunlight appear like a whisper rather than a burst, stretching across the horizon until they touch the tip of each pyramid. For a brief instant before the day fully arrives, the light balances perfectly, one soft gleam on each ancient peak, as if the world itself is tracing its own signature across stone. The desert responds in silence. The wind pauses, the air stills, and for that instant time feels folded. Every sunrise that has ever touched these stones seems to exist together. The first, the thousandth, the millionth still to come. You realise then that the light isn't just something the pyramids receive, it's something they return. That exchange between light and stone feels like the last secret the builders left behind. Everything else, the measurements, the alignments, the myths, all of it leads back to this simple interaction. The pyramids were made to greet the dawn, to stand precisely where the first light could find them, not to worship the sun, but to acknowledge it, to recognise the rhythm of the universe and participate in it without resistance. It's a quiet form of communication, a conversation that never ends because both sides understand the language. For thousands of years that dialogue has continued without interruption. Empires have risen and collapsed, rivers have changed course, mountains have eroded to dust, yet every morning the light returns and the stones answer. That's what makes them timeless. Not their age, but their constancy. They don't need to adapt to meaning. They are meaning. The expression of endurance written into the earth's surface. When the sun rises, the light that falls on them is the same light that once touched the faces of the builders, the same photons travelling through the same sky, carrying the same warmth. It's continuity in its purest form. The human world, in comparison, feels fragile. Our monuments reach upward too, but they fade faster. Our buildings crumble, our technology obsolesces, our signals vanish into static. We build quickly and brilliantly, but rarely for the long term. The pyramids are a reminder of a different kind of ambition, one that measures success not by immediacy but by endurance. They teach that the truest form of progress isn't speed or expansion, but stability. To exist for thousands of years doesn't require dominance, it requires balance. The last light on the horizon each day reflects that lesson. As the sun sets, the pyramids don't resist the darkness. They absorb it. Their edges blur, their surfaces soften, and they merge with the desert as if returning to it. The same process repeats at dawn in reverse. They disappear and reappear, but never truly change. It's a kind of humility disguised as majesty, an understanding that permanence comes not from separation, but from participation. The builders didn't make something to outshine nature. They made something to join it. That idea feels rare now, but it's not lost. We still feel it in moments when the world becomes still, when we watch the sky darken over the ocean, when we hear the echo of our own breath in a quiet room, when we stand before something older than ourselves and feel that smallness that isn't fear but recognition. The pyramids hold that feeling permanently. They are the world's memory of stillness. They remind us that the future is not a race to outrun time, but an invitation to exist within it. It's easy to imagine the builders at work in the same morning light, their silhouettes moving slowly against the rising sun, the sound of tools and voices blending with the wind. They weren't building for fame or immortality. They were building because they understood that creation is a form of reverence. Every block placed was an affirmation that human life, fleeting as it is, can leave something meaningful behind. Their message wasn't arrogance, it was gratitude. Gratitude to the earth, to the sky, to the rhythm that allowed them to exist within both. That gratitude lives in the way the stones catch the light even now. It's as if the surface remembers being shaped by hands that no longer exist, but whose intent still does. Each ray of sunlight becomes a form of remembrance, a continuation of the same human instinct to notice, to connect, to belong. The pyramids don't dominate their surroundings. They harmonize with them. That's why they still move us. They're not about power. They're about alignment. When you look closely, you notice that the desert around them is full of subtle motion. Sand shifts, wind hums, small waves of heat rise from the surface. Everything moves, even in stillness. The pyramids are the one element that seems unmoving, but only because they move at a different pace. Their rhythm matches the Earth's, so slow, so steady, that we mistake it for silence. That's the illusion of permanence. It isn't stillness. It's balance so complete it feels like peace. As the day grows brighter, the edges of the stones sharpen again. The light becomes fierce, and the pyramids turn brilliant white, reflecting more than they absorb. In that brightness, their details vanish, and they become pure shape. Triangles of light against a boundless sky. It's an image that repeats itself endlessly across centuries and cultures, seen by travellers, kings, workers, scientists and dreamers. No matter who stands before them, the experience is the same. A pause, a breath, a sense that something far larger than human effort has been achieved through human hands. There's something comforting in that realization. The pyramids prove that meaning doesn't need to vanish with time. It just changes form. Each generation reinterprets them, and each interpretation becomes part of their story. They are not frozen relics. They are living symbols of endurance. The embodiment of the idea that even as everything else passes, intention can remain. It's possible that one day, even they will fade. The wind will continue, the sand will rise, the stone will wear away grain by grain until only the foundation remains, and then even that will return to dust. But by then, their meaning will have already been absorbed into the world. The pattern they represent, that relationship between light and balance, between knowledge and humility, will still exist, echoing in new forms, new creations, new minds that will continue the same conversation in their own way. That, perhaps, is the true purpose of a message to the future, not to preserve one thing forever, but to ensure that something essential survives change. The pyramids aren't the answer to a mystery. They're the continuation of a thought. They remind us that everything built with sincerity, with care, with understanding of its place in the greater rhythm, becomes part of that pulse. Nothing is ever truly lost if it's aligned with truth itself. The light climbs higher, and the shadows of the pyramids stretch long and sharp across the sand. The desert comes alive again with sound, the wind returning, the hum of insects, the faint call of birds. The world resumes its rhythm. The moment of stillness passes, but the awareness remains. You begin to realize that the lesson of the pyramids isn't about what they are, but about what they make you notice. The silence between thoughts, the continuity beneath change, the persistence of meaning even in decay. When the day finally ends, and the last light slides across the stones, the effect is reversed. The pyramids darken slowly, one face at a time, until only the faintest outline remains against the burning horizon. The sun becomes a deep orange disk sinking into haze, and for a few seconds the entire sky looks like it's on fire. Then it cools, fades, and the world returns to dusk. The cycle completes itself. The light leaves, but not entirely. It lingers in the air, in the stone, in the eyes of those who watched. The last light on the horizon isn't an ending. It's a promise. It says that the sun will rise again, that the conversation between earth and sky will continue, that every loss is just a pause in the rhythm. The builders must have known that too. They must have stood in that same fading light, watching their work glow and then disappear into shadow, understanding that their time would pass but the meaning wouldn't. They didn't build to defy time, they built to join it. They gave shape to the invisible pulse that carries all things forward. The pyramids aren't reminders of what's gone, they're evidence of what remains. As the darkness deepens, the stars return one by one, the same stars that guided the first architects, the same ones that will outlast us. Their light takes thousands of years to reach us, yet it arrives perfectly on time. The same principle governs everything: distance, delay, endurance, connection. The universe speaks in light, and the pyramids answer in form. Together they form a sentence that has never stopped being written. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear it. The slow rhythm of the earth turning, the faint hum of continuity that threads through everything. The pyramids don't interrupt that sound, they amplify it. They are instruments built not to make noise, but to make silence louder, to remind us that beneath every beginning and ending, there's a constant presence holding it all together. That's what endures when everything else falls away. The last light finally fades, leaving only the silhouettes against the starlit sky. The air cools, the sand settles, the world returns to its quiet breathing. Somewhere within that stillness, the same message continues. Patient, endless, unchanged. It isn't written in any language we can translate, but we understand it anyway. It says only this: we were here, we looked at the sky, and we tried to remember that we belong to it. And as the night deepens once more, the horizon glows faintly with the promise of another sunrise, another beginning, another retelling of the same story in the language of light and stone. The pyramids wait, not for worship, not for answers, but simply for the return of the sun, their oldest companion, their eternal audience, the one force that understands their purpose completely. The desert sleeps, the stars move, and somewhere in that vast stillness, the pulse beneath time continues to beat, steady, patient, eternal, carrying the memory of everything that has ever been built, everything that has ever been loved, everything that has ever looked toward the horizon and waited for the light to return,